Which celebrity did you meet before they were famous, and how did they act back then? I went to high school with Sandra Oh. She was funny, dynamic, smart, outgoing, and very into drama. In one school play, she played what I will call a sort of mime character. She didn't have lines, but was still a big part of the action, commenting on what was going on stage through her actions. Anyhow, in one scene, as she was exiting the stage, she banged her head on one of the props. You could hear the loud bang, but she was a pro and just carried on. It's been great to see her have such success, and I love that she's kept in touch with her close friends from high school. You can spot them at awards shows sometimes. My grandpa, rest in peace, owned a grocery store in Miami in the late 70s. Wesley Snipes and his friends once stole some candy from his store, and when he caught them, he let them have it. Since then, Wesley and his friends were regulars. Once Wesley left his bike in front of the store and it got stolen. It was a pretty bad area. My grandpa gave him his old bike that he kept in the back of the store. My uncle took over in 2001 when my grandpa died. In 2007, he came back to the store while my uncle and cousin were there to ask about my grandpa. My uncle said they talked for a little over an hour about how my grandpa treated him like a son. When he found out my grandpa had passed, he felt guilty he didn't visit sooner. He embraced my uncle and cousin and left. My uncle said he told them that they plan on having the building repainted while they talked. About a week later, a crew of painters arrived and told my uncle they were already paid to have the building repainted. Such a genuine dude. Even though he's often portrayed negatively, I'll remember the nice gestures he continued to make our way even after he had made it. Worked in a restaurant about 15 years ago as a manager. Rachel McAdams walked in for an interview. She was still in acting school and serving tables to pay for it. She worked at my restaurant over the course of the next 2 summers, serving on our patio. We're still friends to this day. She hasn't changed one bit. Still bikes to get groceries. This is real late and secondhand, but I knew someone who went to ACM with Ed Sheeran. He said he was lazy in class, skipped classes, and just wanted to smoke green herb. And my acquaintance was mad when Ed started getting more and more famous when Ed didn't even bother with his music courses. I thought it was funny. I went to the same high school as Chris D'Elia. He was a dork, but still arrogant. He worked on the yearbook and gave himself like 3 or 4 pages so he could write his fatuous observations and pretend it was comedy. So that hasn't changed. But in other ways, I guess he has changed. He never did the deed with high schoolers back then. Well, I've never heard of this guy, but from the context we're getting here, it seems like he must have been cancelled for being a pretty sleazy guy. And I should probably say that there's going to be a lot of people here that I've probably never heard of, but I'll use them in case any of you have. That said, here's a story that to me is as funny as it is surprising. My starving actor friend is livid whenever you bring up the Hulk himself, Mr. Mark Ruffalo. Out of all the theatre students in their clique, he was the least serious about acting. He was a skateboarder and just got into acting because his friends were doing it. My friend is annoyed that Ruffalo's become famous and the one getting to make movies with hot actresses, while the others are, at best, doing local murder mystery events. My aunt used to work with Gordon Ramsay's mother, but never made the connection. Once they were out for lunch and he ended up coming in to see his mum and met my aunt in the process. She said he was so lovely and polite. Plus my dad has a bunch of Gordon's old jumpers he didn't want anymore. Not signed or anything like that, it's just a fun family story now. I went to college with Joe Keery, aka Steve Harrington in Stranger Things. He was my college boyfriend's sweet mate and just the nicest guy. His hair has always been dreamy and amazing. Last time I saw him was at a viewing of The Hateful Eight after we graduated, and he still made a point to come over and say hi. Friend of mine was friends with Tom Hanks in high school and went to prom with him. He still writes her personalized birthday cards on one of his typewriters. I went to junior high with Nora Jones. She was the most sincere and serene person. She was fun to talk to, and she never gave a hint of who her father was. The night she won all of those Grammys was very telling that she hadn't changed a bit. I went to high school with Mark Ruffalo. He was nice. He was one of those thespians. Our high school had an acting group that challenged the students to get out of their shell and do things in front of strangers, like introducing yourself as the wild fairy of the woods and presenting them with a flower. We didn't talk much, but like I said, he seemed like a good guy. Went to middle school with Megan Fox for a bit. She rode my bus and mostly kept to herself. Most of the guys would fight over who was going to sit next to her, but she was very shy and didn't have much to say. I went to school with Rupert Grint, Ron Weasley from Harry Potter. I was into acting as well, so we'd done a few school plays together. He was really nice, very chill and a good laugh. I haven't seen him since the school days, but he kept coming to classes whenever he wasn't filming and was always happy to chat about the movies. Sometimes he'd need a little break from so many people wanting to talk, and he'd come and hang out in the library. And honestly, you'd never know he was in the biggest film series of all time. Honestly, I think a lot of these answers boil down to if they wanted fame or not. Rupert just loved what he was doing, and didn't care about being famous and having people kiss his butt. Just a nice, normal kid. He used to live in a town not too far from me. Everyone seemed to think he was a recluse and a bit of a moody prick. But I think, like you said, it can be tiring having people come up to you all the time, and he probably reasonably wanted some quiet for himself. A co-worker of mine met Daisy Ridley while on a backpacking trip. They got to know each other pretty well while traveling together. She told my co-worker that she wanted to become an actress. Looks like that panned out pretty well. They said Daisy was an absolutely lovely individual. I live in the town where Dolly Parton grew up, and practically everyone above the age of 50 who grew up here claims to either be some distant relative of Dolly's or they claim to know her in some way. Everyone has their story of the time they met her. It's pretty obvious, but regardless of who you talk to, Dolly has always been sweet and generous. But everything has simply grown exponentially due to her fame. Examples are the millions of books she gives out for free to children around the globe each month, or how she gave out 10 grand cash to many of my close friends after their houses burned in a fire a couple of years back. Thousands of people are employed here and work for the businesses she owns. It's a tad strange to see when you walk in, but the birthing center at the local hospital is funded by and named after her. I honestly can't think of one person I know who doesn't like her. Dolly's heart has only gotten bigger because of the fame. My father-in-law worked in a high-end business in Southern California in the 80s, and he ended up running straight into Dolly as he was rushing out of a swinging door at the same time she was walking in. As he says, she chest bumped me from 5 feet out. But as he was apologizing profusely, she cut him off and said, "It's okay, darling, but the next time you want to get physical, try buying me a drink first." Then she winked and started giggling as she went on her business. And him and his 2 co-workers who saw it happen have been smitten with her ever since. He met some other celebrities working there, but gosh darn, that's the one I'll always be jealous of. If anybody deserves to be America's sweetheart, it's Dolly. My dad went to school with Steve Irwin. Reckons he was exactly the same as a young fella. He'd be away from school all the time on trips with Bob to rescue and rehome crocs all over Australia. No good at footy, but you know. My mum dated Will Ferrell for a little while. He came round quite a lot, and she said he was really down-to-earth and incredibly funny. However, afterwards they just really lost touch. So we never got to know how he personally changed. My mum says he's still like he used to be. My mum and dad still laugh about her dating him. I went to high school with Dacre Montgomery. He was a jerk with a huge ego in high school, and I saw him recently when he came back to his hometown, and it seems like he's still a jerk with an even bigger ego now. I can't watch Stranger Things without rolling my eyes every time he comes on screen. Jack Black is the same person he was as a teenager. Funny, kind, caring, and spreading that joy of music. My grandfather taught Jack Nicholson in high school math class. He said he was rebellious but wasn't too bad at math. My mum used to ride the bus to work in downtown Cleveland with Steve Harvey's first wife. Apparently she supported him while he was trying to get his career started. Then, basically as soon as he got successful, he divorced her for a younger woman. My mum always hated him because she felt that he treated his first wife like crap, and has a repertoire of choice words she'll scream at the TV whenever he pops up. You know, I've never heard a story about Steve Harvey that makes him seem like even a slightly good person. I knew Brett and Jermaine from Flight of the Conchords back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I met Taika Waititi a few times too. I was a big fan of his art at the time, and there was one painting of someone in a bathtub that stuck in my head. I knew Brett better than the others because he was in a reggae band with my good friend Barnaby. As far as I can tell, they're all exactly the same. The narrator used to work in cafes in Wellington, New Zealand, and I swear the size of that place meant that you'd met fewer people who hadn't seen Brett and Jermaine on the street than who had. It always gave me a bit of a rush when it happened there, though. A friend of mine is buddies with Paul Rudd. Says he's exactly the same and a great human. Exactly the same because he hasn't aged at all in like 20 years? I knew Robert Pattinson about 15 years ago. Nice guy, friendly, a lot of fun to be with. He lived by himself in the centre of Soho, London, in a tiny one-bed flat that I think he felt like the romantic vision of a starving artist, or at least he wanted to. He had a weird side. He'd say random, violent, depraved things, and he was obsessed with Jack Nicholson. He never really gave an F. He had confidence, and he was always himself, and he knew he could be deliberately contradictory, and he used that as a personality trope. But he was a good enough guy, and I get the impression that he's very comfortable with himself now that he's developed his career, that he acts very well, and that he can pick and choose his roles based upon what he wants to do and who he wants to work with. Twilight for him was always a means to an end, and I think he worked it very much to his benefit, and he didn't compromise himself. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Bruno Mars's mum was a bartender at a local karaoke dive bar that I was a regular at. At the time, his biggest hit was the hook for Billionaire by Travie McCoy. Anyway, she was selling tickets for an upcoming concert he was having, and she asked our table if we wanted to buy some. My friend declined, and she exclaimed, "Why not? He's my son." I ended up getting a couple of tickets despite not knowing any of Bruno Mars's songs, and it turned out to be one of the best concerts I've ever been to. The guy knows how to put on a good live show. The tickets were only $40 each, I think. His opening act was a local group of large Polynesian men singing Motown, who went by the name Nesian 9, and they were pretty good too. The next time he was in town for a concert, he had blown up and the tickets were going for $400. I would have loved to see him again, but not at that price. His mum was really nice, down to earth, and a pretty good singer herself. Rest in peace, Bernie. At least she lived long enough to see her son's success. My coworker's dad grew up with Queen Latifah in North Jersey. His whole family loves her because they were about to lose their house, so she paid that off for them. They've never said a bad thing about her. Queen Latifah, if this gets back to you, thanks for what you did for your friends in New Jersey. Phil's a really cool guy. My grandmother and mum were really good friends with George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley from Wham. They got invited to concerts and got to sit in special seats, stuff like that. And a few years ago, me and my family stayed with Andrew Ridgeley in his guest house in Cornwall for a weekend. But they seemed to me like they stayed really nice to my grandparents and mum, and Andrew Ridgeley was very kind to my family when we met him. My mum is friends with Johnny Knoxville's cousin, so she met Johnny once and had no idea who he was. She said he was nice and funny as heck. She didn't realize until years later she'd even met him until I showed her one of his movies. From what I gather, he's a normal dude and pretty hilarious. One of my aunts actually dated Bill Gates for a bit. I believe a few years before things took off for him. She said he was too into her or something like that at the time, and it weirded her out, I guess. Sorry about the lack of detail. My mum knew Mel B from her high school. Apparently she always copied other people's work. The comments have really got me thinking. There seem to be a lot of actual celebrities that stayed perceptually genuine after gaining fame. Meanwhile, now I personally know a few social media influencers who seem to talk down to anyone that can't afford to live in LA. I just find that so interesting. Keisha. Total nerd. 1600 on her SATs. Quiet, a bit of a social outcast. Nice though. You could tell she cared about others and wouldn't ever hurt a fly. My brother used to play basketball with a bunch of people in high school, and among those who'd sometimes join in was Pete Davidson. My brother said he got ripped on a ton and no one really liked him, but that might just be because he wasn't great at basketball. I met him last year while he was out with his friends. I didn't want to say anything till my mum rolled down the window and asked if I could get a picture with him. We were in a parking lot. He was on FaceTime with someone and told them he'd call back later, and he took a picture with me. Really nice guy. My 8th grade science teacher dated Bill Nye. Broke up with him because he didn't like kids. Hold up, my high school biology teacher dated Bill Nye too. Not sure why they didn't work out though. I find it hilarious that at least 2 of his exes became science teachers. I went to high school with Post Malone. Pre-Malone, I guess. We graduated the same year. He always wore a suit to class and was that nerdy, dedicated kid. I'm glad to see how his life turned out. I hoped nothing for the best for him, and now I listen to him all the time. I'm just a rando to him though, we never really talked. I went to high school with Emma Chamberlain. She was a huge bully in high school and pretty much a brat who thought she could get away with whatever she wanted, before she got famous. Her parents were divorced, which led to both of them always trying to be her friend and never actually parenting her, so they basically let her do whatever she wanted. When she said that people from her high school made fun of her because she was poor and that the parking lot was all BMWs and Range Rovers, I lost my mind because she was the bully in high school, and while the school definitely had some wealthy students, it was mostly a middle-class crowd. I knew Cillian Murphy back in secondary school. We didn't go to the same school, but we mingled a lot. He was a few years older than me. The guy was super quiet, but really friendly. I remember when he was cast in 28 Days Later, and people were pretty hyped for him, but a good few people didn't think much of it. Once it came out though, a lot of people changed their tune when they could see him actually act amazingly. Him being quiet but interesting really tracks from the few interviews I've seen with him. Man, I can't wait to see 28 years later this year, even if the likelihood of that guy's character being alive and kicking in it is pretty much non-existent. We'll see. Jennifer Lawrence. I moved to Louisville middle of 7th grade. She was my first friend and the first person I had a sleepover with. We hit it right off. She was very different from me, a cheerleader, came from a lot of wealth, but her family was really awesome, and we were both kind of weird and outgoing, so we became good friends very fast. Her family owned a farm that had a children's summer camp, hi-ho, and we went to it a couple of times. She had one of her birthday parties there. I remember her kissing our friend John under a trampoline. We talked about that for way too long. We hung out fairly often until she moved to New York City a year and a half after we met. We started taking acting classes together in the 8th grade at a local theater here in town, Walden Theater. It's funny because on our first day, we had no idea we were both taking the class. I walked into the first one and there she was. We were both so excited to have a friend there. We were in the first level of the theater, but after a couple of weeks, both moved to the intermediate class. We were the oldest people in the class, so that's why they moved us up so fast. It had nothing to do with talent. We carpooled together to Walden Theater every Tuesday and Thursday for acting class. I'd ride the bus home with her mum would take us to class, then my mum would pick us up and take her home. She was a natural at acting, I'll tell you that. I was still somewhat shy, but she could pretty much be any given character, and even though she was 14, you'd believe it. She always talked about how she had a photographic memory, and that's how she was able to memorize lines so easily. And she did. It was insane. I've read that she said she had no prior acting experience, but this isn't true. I'm not sure if she said this for part of her look, or maybe she considered what we did informal, but we definitely took acting classes for our entire 8th grade year. I will say with her that what you see is what you get. She was always very quirky, kind of weird, which was funny because she was so preppy presenting, but really wasn't like that. She was very loud, made her presence known, and it's been bizarre seeing her in interviews because she acts the exact same. I remember after she moved to New York City to pursue modeling between 8th and 9th grade. It worked because soon after she was in a commercial for Burger King and a couple of MTV's My Sweet 16 commercials as well. She was doing online classes for our high school, Ballard High School, and came to visit one time in 9th grade and another time in 10th grade. I squealed when I saw her. I genuinely missed her. I had no idea she was about to become one of the most famous actresses of our generation. I always hear she comes to town for holidays, but at this point I have no idea how to contact her. She had a private Facebook for a while, assuming it really was her. For a time, I had a few fake accounts from her request to be my Facebook friend, along with a lot of people we went to school with. The last time we spoke was for my 21st birthday, and I'm 29 now, but I'd love to catch up with her. I can't help but wonder if she remembers me. I still have her yearbook photo that she signed hanging up in my room, our yearbooks and a couple of photos from a disposable camera. I knew Tom Holland at the time he did the Tsunami movie. We weren't really friends, but he was funny and friendly. I had a teacher who taught Drake. Apparently he was a nice kid, but then turned into a D-bag when he started getting famous. When my dad was in the army, he and some other army members were invited to the filming set of Saving Private Ryan. They were asked to show the actors how to hold guns and how to act like real soldiers. He told me that he had met Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks during his time there. He said that both of them seemed like nice people, but that Tom Hanks in particular was incredibly down-to-earth, genuine, and had a great sense of humor. I know this is after he became famous, but it's nice to know fame didn't turn him into something negative. I played drums with Mike Portnoy in high school band, and I'm still friends with his sister, and he's still a cool guy. My brother knows the guy that Squidward was based off. Turns out that made him even more bitter because he was being made fun of. My mum knew Seal as far back as when he was still trying to be an architect, and she says he was always really nice. They didn't stay in touch, she moved away and they were never close. But she said he went out of his way to foster genuine connections to people before and after his music started to gain traction. He always had star quality. Everyone from the most important person in the room to the janitor walking through would be drawn to him, and he'd engage with everyone in a way that would really stick. She always mentions he was just a really sincere, deeply felt person. My biology teacher was friends with Rainn Wilson, or Dwight from The Office. They used to grab coffee often around the time The Office started. From how she described him, Rainn seems like a pretty down-to-earth guy. You know, this will probably get lost in the sea of comments, but my ex-boyfriend's mum ran a pizza shop that Pink worked at as a 16-year-old. I guess she would always be singing randomly at work. She'd use spoons, utensils, and anything she could find to use as a fake microphone. But she was a crappy worker and would straight up walk out of her shifts whenever she wanted without telling anyone and somehow not get fired for it. She didn't give an F even back then. When did you win by faking it until you made it? When I got my first construction job, I had to go buy a bunch of gear. Carhartts, which are heavy work pants, steel-toe boots, and a bunch of hand tools. The first thing I did when I got home was take the pants out to the garage and drag them through the dirt on the floor, stomp on them, rub some oil on them, and pull out a few threads. The steel toes got hit with a shovel and dirtied up, and the tools got their handles scraped and dirtied. I showed up on site with 2 other guys who looked like they were mannequins from the store. They got razzed for their shiny new gear, and they thought I knew what I was doing. Suckers. I went to Cheonan World Dance Festival in Korea, which includes a massive parade down the main street of the city. The best spot I could get where I could actually see was right at the end of the parade behind a fence. There was a grandstand there that was filled with VIPs, family of the mayors and officials of the sister cities. One of the guards came up to me and ushered me past the gate and brought me up into the grandstand and sat me right behind the mayor of Cheonan. Then they started passing around free samples of products made in or near Cheonan. Afterwards, they made everyone applaud the visitors and take pictures of us shaking hands with the mayor. I was so lost, but I just went with it because it was such a great time. My kids and I were in a touristy area of Mexico, and there was this fancy resort that had access to the beach. We weren't part of the resort, but they had really nice pools. We realized that the only things designating resort patrons were that they were all American and had specific towels. Well, we were already American, and then we got some discarded towels. We spent 2 full days hanging out at the resort. At one point, my daughter made friends with someone with a gold towel, so she got to use that. The gold towel got her all the free soda she could drink. Way back when I was 17, I was working at a conference at MIT, and I came across a packed lecture hall. They were showing the World Cup, and the hall was full of people rooting for Brazil. So I sat down and started cheering for Brazil, got instant acceptance. They started giving me beers, and I skipped work and got blasted, cheering for a team I had no connection to in a sport I didn't care about all day. It was so much fun. I like that a bunch of these stories are people getting into areas or situations to get ahead in life, but this guy just started cheering a sport he wasn't even interested in for free booze. I probably would have done it too in university, who am I kidding? While in high school, I went to Columbia University for some seminar on publishing. I was working on my school's art and literary magazine, and our supervisor thought that this would be a big help for us. After the seminar, I was wandering around, taking in the sights of this big, prestigious institution, when I came across a different seminar, this one for Columbia law students. I would have kept walking, except this seminar included a free lunch, pizza, and I was hungry. So I walked into the seminar, took a seat, and pretended to be a law student at Columbia University. I listened to the speakers for a bit, chatted very briefly with some of the other attendees, got my pizza, and got the heck out of Dodge. I managed to get some required immunizations after the health center closed by accident. I did the checkup thing, the doc told me I'd need to go downstairs and ask for vaccine 1 and vaccine 2, and that I'd be good to travel after that. I didn't know better, so I did exactly that. I walked down to the lobby, saw the sign for the lab I was directed to, and walked straight in to tell the tech back there exactly what I needed. The tech gave me the vaccines, and it wasn't until afterwards that I found out that A, they were closed, and B, you're supposed to make a separate appointment for that. The tech just assumed I was someone important because I didn't hesitate. Guy Gomer. This dude goes into BBC TV studios for a regular job interview. Gomer was waiting in the main reception area of the BBC television centre in West London to be interviewed for a job as a data support cleanser in the corporation's IT department. Unfortunately, he has the same first name as the guy being interviewed on the BBC News that day. Shenanigans ensue, he's interviewed for several minutes before the hosts realize he's not the right person, and he's gained a ton of pop culture notoriety and made a bunch of fun, paid television appearances since then. Years ago, I took a DSLR camera to a concert. When they told me I couldn't bring it in, I lied and said I was with the college newspaper and we were running a front-page story on the venue and I needed pictures. I talked to the event coordinator and she asked the band, and the next thing I knew, I had a press pass. That lie got me in the gap between the stage and security. I had no idea how to use that camera, but I faked it. Then I handed off the badge and the camera to my friends, and one by one, they faked it. That was a great time. For real? My job. On a rational level, I know that I'm good at it, I'm successful, popular with coworkers and my superiors, and people tell me they love my work on a regular basis. But I still have a serious case of imposter syndrome every other day. What am I doing here? I shouldn't be allowed to work here. I have no idea what I'm doing. Stop paying me for this and hire actual professionals. I went to a Flatbush Zombies concert and we got VIP passes, which effectively meant nothing. There was a second floor where the bands were hanging out and one lone security guard at the bottom of the stairs. We just briskly walked past him and held up our wristbands and he didn't say anything. We used the same method to get on stage with all the bands and to sneak out the back door and smoke with Meech. Walking to my bus on the way home from winter break, I realized I'd brought tickets for the wrong day, don't ask how, and after a brief call the company told me I couldn't do anything about it and it was the last day I was allowed to be on campus. Realizing I was stuck, I decided to just get on the bus anyway. The driver barely looked at my ticket before nodding me on and I immediately got on and sat next to a friend and went to sleep to avoid suspicion. When I woke up, my friend told me that they'd overbooked and some people had to wait on a second bus. After I got home, I found out they'd left mine and a few other bags behind, so I had to call up again and negotiate having my bags sent for me and a few students who weren't fluent enough in English to negotiate for themselves. Luckily, after multiple speech checks and no one asking for my info, I made it home with all my stuff. And that's the story of how I stowed away on a bus. In short, no one ever questions a sleeping person on a bus. Being an artist manager, it felt like I had to act like I belonged every single day when I was just starting out. Meetings, phone calls, emails, everything. It felt like I needed some sort of confidence and D-bag attitude I didn't think I had. It felt weird trying to be someone else at work every day. When I was in Croatia, I walked into an aquarium where a German school group of about 16 to 18-year-olds were waiting for their teacher to pay them in. I was only 19 at the time, so I just stood amongst them like an inconspicuous penguin, and once we were shuttled in by our tour guide, I flaked off to look at some turtles. Despite being 6'2", I'm consistently good at blending into crowds to the point of being invisible pretty much without trying. I've accidentally walked into the wrong party before and stayed there for a few hours, when in reality I was invited to the one next door. Huh, real-life invisible man here. I wonder how you didn't realize that you didn't know anyone or that the person who invited you wasn't there either. Wild. When I was in college, parking was hell to find during football games, and often you had to park over a mile away. They also wouldn't let you near the stadium unless you were faculty or a cop. However, at the time we had construction going on, and lots of people were driving large white trucks just like the truck I had. Seeing this, I took it upon myself to try my limits and try to get on campus without being stopped. 9 times out of 10 it worked and I could park right outside the stadium. You can go anywhere you want if you have a clipboard, safety vest, and hard hat. And if nothing else works, a ladder. I'm a massive, lifelong Star Wars fan, so when The Last Jedi premiered, I leapt at the chance to go. The problem was, it was on a weekday, and while I took a Ferris Bueller day, none of my friends did. Additionally, I had a migraine in the morning of, so I ended up arriving quite late at the venue at 10 a.m. I was still quite zonked out from the migraine and subsequent medication, and was hustling towards the queue, occasionally asking workers if I was going in the right direction. They all confirmed that I was, and it was just around the corner. Eventually, I arrived at what I thought was the end of the queue, as there were people waiting around in costume, and I settled in for the long wait. A few hours later, it was time to move into the venue, and I'm stoked. I get up and eagerly follow the people in front of me, who I now realize are in wheelchairs, and are wearing Star Wars wristbands, and are actually first in the queue. I'm not in a wheelchair, I do not have wristbands, but I am in front of the queue. Oh, crap. Thoughts of the IT crowd filled my head, and in an instant my anxiety kicked in. I could feel the panic attack rising in me as I trudged behind them, awaiting the order to go to the back of the queue, which at that point meant I probably wouldn't get in. I debated just booking it to the nearest alleyway to have my shame-induced panic attack in private, when I noticed I was part of the group instead of behind them. I started panicking even more and tried to move, but to no avail. We had just passed through the gates and I was officially in the premiere. I stood inside the gates for a moment, debating whether or not I should leave out of pure guilt, when the group I pretended to be part of sped past me cheering. No comments on how I was clearly not disabled, no one stopped me to check for a wristband. I don't know if that group hated me and was ignoring me, didn't care about one person cutting the queue, or if they were actually helping. All I know is that it was one of the greatest nights of my life, seeing some of my childhood heroes and experiencing the magic of Star Wars in a whole new way. All thanks to a group of disabled people that didn't rat me out. In short, real life, I'm disabled moment. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Back in 2006, I went to Lollapalooza and there was an after-party that my favorite band was playing at. My friend and I didn't have tickets, so we just went up to the back door of the venue. I whispered to my friend, "Act as if, like from the movie Boiler Room," and he says, "Okay," and just follows my lead. So we follow a band member in saying, "Hold the door please," and they did, thinking that we worked there and we're just out for a smoke. We ended up walking up the stairs and watching the band on stage. No idea how we didn't get caught and kicked out, but that might have been one of the coolest things, act as if, ever got someone. Ended up on the same flight home as the band after that too, coincidentally. I didn't really participate in any after-school clubs besides playing a sport. One day they were taking club pictures for the yearbook, so me and my buddy just decided to jump in every club pic that they were taking. Ended up being in choir, band, advanced French, ultimate frisbee, and future teachers of America, to name a few. Would have been in the robotics club, but we did get ratted out by that point. Princeton reunion. Lived in Princeton, New Jersey for a while. Everyone kept talking about the reunion. Apparently every year they throw a massive drinking party on campus. You need a wristband to get in, but there's plenty of old alums in the area that get them and don't want them. My brother's friend scored a couple, and with some careful passing back and forth, we all managed to get in. This party was wild. Like flash your wristband, here's a free beer. They were tossing empty kegs into a mountain-sized pile like you might do with a can in a backyard barbecue. People were drunk and very friendly, until you told them you were from Kansas and didn't go to Princeton. Then you were a pleb and very quickly dismissed. So screw it, we just started making stuff up. "Yeah, boy, what are you in? Me? Eastern linguistics. Astronomics. Oh, okay, let's get another beer." I had so many made-up degrees that by the end of the night I was having trouble keeping them straight because I'd keep rerunning into people from before. I also peed in a lot of weird, shady corners all over campus that night. Turns out people at Princeton aren't necessarily the smartest people in the world, but they sure are nice if they think you're part of their fancy club. They throw one hell of a party though. Last weekend we got the train to London and jumped in the first open table in first class and enjoyed the free tea and Wi-Fi. It helps that the ticket guy didn't come around, but none of the staff cared enough to say anything. I landed a cushy GS11 position, and I still don't feel like I really know all of this stuff well enough to be here. I just act confident and pretend to know what's going on. I suspect everyone else is doing the same thing. This is government work after all. I was at the South by Southwest Gaming Expo in Austin, Texas. There was an area full of really high-tech gaming computers, and I saw other people casually playing. When a computer finally opened up, I sat down and soon a game of PUBG begins. It turns out it was a tournament and I'd taken someone else's seat. There were people crowding around to watch over our shoulders, and an announcer started talking. I'd never even played the game before, and I didn't do very well. These guys trained all the time, and I'd never even so much as launched the game. This is the natural result, but the narrator does know of a similar but different story of another spontaneous tournament gamer. I think he was an Aussie guy who ended up winning in a low-level Command & Conquer 3 tournament, and ended up going to a higher level for a while. But that individual actually was a strategy pro gamer, just one who'd never played that particular game. A friend got me a job when I was 17 doing graphic design. This particular position required more than 3 years of experience and an understanding of pretty much every Adobe program. He lied when vouching for me and basically said, "If anyone asks, you're 20 and you know exactly what you're doing. If you have any questions about what to do, ask me." Prior to that, I'd done maybe 3 or 4 graphic design projects as freelance gigs, but I was still very new to it. That job worked out a lot better than it should have, no one asked too many questions, and it helped me realize that even though I was doing graphic design as a hobby, Doing it for work hurts my soul. When I was studying abroad in Costa Rica, my friend who was a rugby player back in the States wanted to go to this rugby practice he randomly found out about while talking to a guy who was on this team. Next thing I know, my skinny white butt was being hauled along so he didn't have to go alone. I was in a legit club rugby practice that's all in Spanish, and I barely spoke any at this point, trying to do my best to fit in with all of these hulking, terrifying-looking rugby players. Luckily, I've participated in my fair share of sports practices growing up, so I was able to figure out what the drills were just by watching them, and was able to run through practice kinda like I knew what I was doing. Eventually, I was paired up with this one huge beast to do tackling drills. I think he might have figured out my ruse, so he took it easy on me and taught me some basics. He was really cool. Went on to find out afterwards that this team was playing in something like the Latin American Club Rugby Championships, and that player was the best rugby player in Latin America. Go figure! I started at my current employer about 15 years ago. The manager of my department was this awful guy with no management experience. I filled the gaps to make do. One day he just announced he was going to focus on other tasks. Nobody thought to actually designate a new manager, so one day I just started doing all management's tasks. Another day, sometime later, I just started putting manager on my business cards and email tags. Nobody questioned it. A couple of years later, after I'd started seeing the need for better global coordination, I just started using global manager as my title. Again, no one asked anything. A couple of years ago, I upgraded to global directory of, and I was given several raises and nobody ever said, "No, you're not." And that's how I became a director in a global enterprise software company. Was taking some pictures in a city when I stumbled upon an outdoor fashion show which was free to visit, but had an area in front of the runway for photographers. So with my not-so-professional-looking gear, I went into that area, not knowing it was meant for real professionals who had signed up for it beforehand. I still don't know how I got in there without anyone noticing. Maybe it's because I was there very early and the organization wasn't up to speed yet. Other amateur photographers that tried to get in were turned away. I had crap gear, the wrong lens and everything, but no one questioned my presence. I had a blast trying out runway photography in that pretty crowded area. It must have looked like I belonged there because I wasn't kicked out. I moved to Columbus, Ohio in 2006 to start a new IT contracts job for a fairly large company. I'd been there exactly 2 weeks when a woman walked up to my cubicle and popped her head in. "Hey, the lunch is starting, we should head in," she said, giving me the thumbs up and obviously expecting me to follow her. I had no clue who this woman was, what this lunch was, but I was new in town and I knew nobody. I was happy to head to a lunch with other people. We walked to a large conference room that was filled with chairs facing a podium, tables full of yummies and a ton of people, so I just got in line and grabbed some food. I knew nobody in there, but it quickly became clear that a lot of people there were strangers to each other and were from different departments. Handshakes and introductions were going around, and I just went with the flow. I introduced myself, said I was a contractor. I learned this was a good catch-all for not specifying what department you worked in, and I filled my plate with some great food. I sat down in one of the chairs, and for the next hour I listened to people talk about the new product and how it all worked so hard to implement it. How we all did such a great job and how the upper management was extremely proud of us. In the end, they had us get together for a large group photograph. I was right in front, dead center. Afterwards, there was a sign-in sheet that asked for our name and our supervisor. I filled it out, grabbed some food to go, and headed out. Over the next few months, I received updates in my email about the project, received an award that was delivered to my cube, received a couple of certificates for my accomplishments that I'd never accomplished, and was invited to a dinner a year later for the anniversary of the launch. I didn't want to push my luck on that one. It turns out that when I was brought on board to do my job, the department I was connected to didn't have any room, and I had to sit in a cube belonging to another department. It was assumed that I belonged to that department by others, and nobody really questioned it. My favorite thing about the whole group photo was that it was blown up and hung in the main lobby with other group photos, so I'll forever be a part of the group that I was never part of, and damned proud of it. When I visited India in 2013, we went to the Taj Mahal. Now, at the time, they had 2 rates to get in, a cheap rate for Indians and a pricier rate for foreigners. I think it equated to something like 20 pence for Indians and £7 for foreigners. They could normally spot who was a foreigner by clothing, way of speaking, and they also had checks to make them pay for the higher rate. I was with my mum, dad, and brother. They had lines separated by gender, so I went with my mum, and dad and brother went together. My dad wanted us to get in at the lower rate if we could because he wanted to save some money or something. Now, my mum is originally from India herself, so she knows how to fit in, and she got me and herself to pay the lower rate. My dad wasn't so successful. Him and my bro aren't originally from the country, even though his parents are, so he and my bro paid the higher rate. We got to the front of the Taj Mahal and I realized there were 2 queues to get in. The one for those who'd paid the lower rate was maybe 3 hours long, and it was 4 p.m. or so at this point. Then there was the shorter queue for those who'd paid the higher rate, which was maybe about 15 minutes wait, tops. We had 2 lower rate tickets and 2 higher rate tickets between the 4 of us, and they were quite distinctive in color. My dad decided he wanted us to all try to get in together on his and my brother's tickets. There was a security guy yelling at a guy in front of us who was trying to jump into the shorter queue on lower rate tickets, so my dad waved the 2 higher rate tickets he had in front of the security guy, who at that point said something along the lines of, "Look at these high rate tickets, this is what you need to get in the shorter queue." And he started waving us through, so we took that as a cue to get into the shorter queue. Had a blast of a time. When did a mansplainer get shut down? About a year into our marriage, we bought a dining table and chairs, our first real furniture. My wife was so happy that she posted the pictures on Facebook and wanted her mum to look. Her mum commented on the phone that it was a nice oval table. My wife is upset. "You didn't look." "Yes, I did. It's not oval, it's rectangular." "No, it's an oval. I looked." My wife finally gets her mum to go look. Her mum sees that she's incorrect and creates this gem. "Well, that's what I call an oval." "You mean you call rectangles ovals?" This has become a running gag to us. Whenever we lose an argument, we always end it with, "Well, that's what I call it." Was at the zoo. I said it was crazy that there are penguins in South Africa. My friend says I'm wrong and that there aren't any in Africa because it's way too hot for them there. I told him the only reason I brought it up is because we were literally at the African penguin exhibit. And the guy who insisted I was pronouncing my own name wrong. I was in class once where my classmate said his last name was Osborne, and some guy kept arguing, "I'm pretty sure it's Osborne." He got angry and yelled out, "I'm pretty sure I know how to say my last fricking name." Funny stuff. I was a stay-at-home dad for my 2 daughters. My youngest was a toddler at the time. Had a lady tell me that I had no business bathing my children because I was male and my kids were female. I welcomed her to the 21st century and told her to mind her own frickin' business. I was the person who needed correcting, actually. In grade 2, I explained to my entire class, as pretentiously as a 7-year-old could, that the singular of sheep is shoop. My logic was the singular of geese is goose, and that rule must apply to sheep as well. I still remember the other kids looking at me like I was dropped on my head as a baby. Yeah, the English language is inconsistent as all heck. That's what you get when you jam a whole bunch of other, also inconsistent languages together over the course of a millennium and then let it develop by itself. Senior kindergarten, I had an activity for Mother's Day to color some pre-printed cards with 3 tulips. The teacher told us to color them red, yellow, and orange. 6-year-old me colored one purple because I didn't like orange. My teacher told me I was wrong and to redo it because purple tulips don't exist. I told my mum when I got home. She cut the purple tulip out of our garden, and I took it into class the next day to prove my teacher wrong. Someone corrected me on my gender once during a phone call. I have a gender-neutral name, and people screw it up online all the time. "Hello, could I speak to the name, please?" "Yep, this is she." "No, they're a man." I gave him a moment of silence to sort himself out while I wheezed with trying to hold back my laughter. "What language is the most spoken in the world?" I said, "Chinese, probably, I think." "Well, no, it's Portuguese. Everyone knows that, idiot." "Vietnam is a war, not a country. A war that the US won." A guy told me he went to Nice for holiday. I said the south of France is a beautiful place. The guy laughs and tells me Nice is in Italy, but it's an easy mistake to make. I'm too shocked to respond. How the frick do you go on holiday and not know what country you're in? I was playing a pickup soccer match and I said something about scoring a goal directly from a corner kick. This guy immediately corrects me and says that goals directly from a corner don't count. He was absolutely adamant and talked about how he's played the sport his whole life and that it doesn't count at any level of the game. He's completely wrong. My mother-in-law is convinced that The Hobbit is a 2-book series. I've tried to disabuse her of this notion, including by showing her Wikipedia and copies of the book available on Amazon. She wouldn't have it. Eventually, the argument became heated and we had to agree to disagree. I still bring it up to my wife because it bugs her. I was arguing with my ex and I told her that I'm allowed to converse with anyone I'd like. She stopped the argument to tell me that the word is conversate and not converse. My mum. She had mental health problems and would express and insist on bizarre truths when she was ill. My boyfriend at the time came over. He said his parents were going to Hawaii. I said that I always wanted to visit an island in the Pacific. My mum asked if I was stupid. Hawaii is in Africa. She sounded the letters out extra long for emphasis. I just said I must have forgotten that and did my best not to laugh. My boyfriend became indignant and despite my frantically waving "no," proceeded to try and correct her and say that I was right. That didn't go over very well. I spent the next half hour in private trying to explain to him what delusions are. It was extra tricky because she was very intelligent. People just didn't expect the crazy. But when she cycled, oh boy could she come up with some humdingers. It was actually easier as she aged and her hair went grey. People understand dementia so they weren't caught so flat-footed, and they'd respond to her with less indignation and more understanding. It made it easier for me to look after her as she aged. I never took offense to the stuff she said, because I knew her control over these things ebbed and flowed. When I was in kindergarten, I told all of the other kids that the word dumb was spelt D-U-M, without the B at the end, because in one of the Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote cartoons, Bugs said, "And mud spelled backwards is dumb." The teacher tried to correct me, but I was insistent and eventually burst into tears because I'd just seen the cartoon that weekend, damn it, Miss Howley. We were at the beach and my wife was putting sunscreen on our toddler. A woman sitting close to us rolled her eyes and said to my wife, "That boy doesn't need sunscreen. Helicopter parents raise soft children. Ridiculous." We're pretty far from overprotective parents, so it caught us off guard for sure. Apparently, you can't raise a tough kid unless you give them the chance to develop skin cancer. Wow, gotta say that one has never come up in our Helicopter Parents series. Maybe if the narrator searched the submitted stories far enough, he'd find this lady complaining about the ridiculous fools pampering their children by protecting them from the sun. I was working as a receptionist on summer break from college. One day, a woman with a tired, Midwestern, middle-aged voice called from a potential vendor's office to ask for our mailing address. So I rattled off, 60 West 26th Street, Suite 400. She stops and asks me to repeat, so I do. She stops me again and asks in this faux puzzled way, "So that's SWEET 400. I reply with innocent earnestness because I think somehow I haven't been clear that it's Suite SUITE. She responds with this incredulous yet delighted laugh that goes on for what seemed like 5 minutes. "Dear, that word you just spelled isn't pronounced sweet," she said like she was talking to a 5-year-old that had just failed kindergarten. "It's pronounced suit." I thought she had to be joking, or I still haven't made myself clear, so I actually say, "No, sorry, I wasn't clear. It's sweet, you know, like a suite of officers." She then sighs wearily like she just can't believe what she has to deal with and levels with me. "Look, I feel bad for telling you this, but you're making a complete fool out of yourself every time you say your office address. I know you're going to be embarrassed, but when you get off the phone with me, go find a dictionary and have someone else explain to you how to pronounce the word. It's probably not your fault, it's your parents probably, giving you no schooling, and you were badly educated so you don't know any better. But if you don't want to be fired, you'll do as I say for your own good." She then proceeds to make me say the address again, insisting I pronounce suite as suit, and not allowing me to continue if I say it correctly. So I mutter my way through it, and she finally gets off the phone after telling me that I'd thank her one day. I just kept wishing she had inadvertently put the phone down wrong so it didn't disconnect, because I was pretty sure the next sentence out of her mouth to anyone within ears in her office would have been, "My God, you wouldn't believe that idiot I just spoke to. She kept telling me her office suite number. I didn't know what she was talking about, so I made her spell it out for me because I wasn't previously aware a human being could be so stupid as to pronounce SUITE as sweet when anyone with half a brain knows it's pronounced suit. Why oh why did they give morons jobs? Only to have everyone around her go, wondering if they should be the one to break the news and weather the storm. My first week as a freshman in college literature class, I referred to the peonies mentioned in a story, and my classmate said, "It's pronounced ponies." I looked doubtful and said, "Really? I'm pretty sure it's just peonies." She went on a bit of a rant about how her grandmother grew them and she knew all about them. Not everyone at a good university is necessarily all that bright. My little brother, then aged 8, read a neighborhood flyer about a pool party and pronounced hors d'oeuvre as horse d'oeuvre. My friend, who was a know-it-all at 16, laughed in a really exaggerated way and said, "I can't believe you just pronounced horse d'oeuvre as horse d'oeuvre." I hope that makes sense. I still make fun of her for that. A few weeks ago, I was stung by a bee in a theme park and the stinger wouldn't come out. I started getting a really bad rash from the venom, and the first aid lady laughed at me and said it wasn't coming from the bee sting because venom? Bees don't have venom. And she refused to give me any tweezers to help get the stinger out because I was acting like a baby. Probably when I was 5 years old and just starting school. My first name used to be one commonly spelt with a Y at the end, however mine was actually spelt with an I at the end instead. I wrote my name down and my teacher kept telling me that I'd spelt it wrong and we both argued and got very frustrated with each other. She was very embarrassed when another teacher put her in her place for shouting at me to the verge of tears when I'd actually spelt my name correctly. My girlfriend tried to convince me it was spelt phalanges with an F and not phalanges with a PH. She's really nice though. I had a teacher once correct my spelling of wolves, plural, to wolfs. This was an English teacher, and the editor of the school newspaper for which I was writing. She was the regular English teacher while I was in AP, so I wasn't familiar enough with her to realize that she was a blithering idiot. She also preferred to spell the plural of elf as elfs rather than elves. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My dad adamantly refused to believe that narwhals are real. I had to show him not just photos but videos of narwhals before he finally believed me. In all fairness, they're maybe the fakest animal that exists. They look like they're drawn by a 5-year-old. Also, did you know that the horn is just one tooth that's really long and comes through their lip? So it's not even in the center. It's enough to drive a person crazy. In 5th grade health class, I said that it wasn't true that gum takes 7 years to pass through your digestive system. My teacher then said that it's very dangerous to swallow gum because in your stomach you have an organ that, quote, mashes up your food, and when you swallow gum it gets stuck to that organ. She then said that eventually if you swallow too much gum you'll no longer be able to digest food. Is it that hard to tell kids about stomach acid? Okay, the narrator didn't know that stomach acid can actually break down chewing gum until this story made him go on a Google trip. So, folks, you heard it here first. Don't go swallowing that stuff because it's still not exactly easy on your tummy, and apparently it can stick together and snowball if you do it all the time, but it's not the end of the world if you accidentally gulp it in shock once in a while. I had a really self-assured science teacher. Here are some highlights. They told us that Harambe was shot for trying to eat a child, told us that gorillas were carnivores. When asked why, she said that no animal that big can survive off plants. Lady, you talked about dinosaurs. One of our subs had nicknames that she liked being called. One of them was Wicked Witch of the West, because she was very nice and not witch-like at all. Our science teacher told us which sub we'd have before she arrived, and one of our students said, "Oh, the Wicked Witch!" And that student got detention. When the sub arrived, we all made a point to greet her as the Wicked Witch. If that didn't shock the teacher, then the sub's delight at us remembering her nickname from 3 years ago was show-stopping. She told us that people in Florida didn't have basements, my aunt lived in Florida and had a basement, and told us that the school handbook prevented us from having our phones not shut all the way down. It said no such thing. And finally, a student asked how fast the Earth revolved. The teacher said flatly, 1 year. The student rephrased the question, realizing what he was asking and what the teacher thought he'd asked were different. He asked at how many miles per hour the Earth spun on its axis. 1 year, barked the teacher. 3 or 4 different people tried to explain the question, and one got sent to the hall. This lady was mid-40s and adamant that we weren't allowed to fact-check her. A student got detention from Googling the Harambe incident because she was supposedly out of area on her laptop. An adult woman, somewhere between 18 to 21, tried to fiercely argue with me, a 17-year-old boy, that women didn't have urethras and that they went number 1 from their fun bean. I ran into our local vet and her very religious younger sister. As the vet and I talked, her sister looked out into the store parking lot and saw an old man staggering to his truck. The little sister said very primly, "There, but for the grace of God go I." I said, "Actually, he's a very well-respected man." She replied, "He's obviously drunk before noon." "No," I said, "he has MS. He's my father and your sister's pastor." The big sister had the grace to look embarrassed. My dad, when he corrected me about how sugar causes health problems. My explanation is the whole fat storage, insulin resistance, diabetes thing. And his? His is that when you eat sugar, its rough edges nick the insides of your veins and arteries, roughing them up and making things catch on all of the nicks, leading to blood clots, strokes, and myriad other problems. He still also believes that blood is red, blue, and black. He's got a whole host of weird health facts. He's like the walking, talking version of those old medical catalogs that sell bizarre and outlandish products that don't work for serious ailments. I love him to death. I adore him enough to have him come live with us. But we do just shake our heads sometimes. I said to my mum in a conversation about World War II that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, but she said, "That's wrong, North Korea did that." At my little sister's confirmation, I was her sponsor. I was 18, she was 14. The woman next to me got all nasty because I was nodding off and she said I should be ashamed and I was being disrespectful. What she didn't know was that I had end-stage liver failure and had hepatic encephalopathy. Plus, I was on a lot of pain medication. Afterwards, I told my mum about it, sponsors were seated separately from parents, and she was angry. She cornered this witch in the bathroom and just reamed her. Witch lady skulked out very quickly after that. Glad to say a year later I got my transplant and I'm now healthy and doing great, turning 27 in 10 days. Warning, cringy and also infuriating. My grandmother has Alzheimer's. I was explaining it to a few people when this girl in my class butts in and states that 1. Alzheimer's doesn't exist, only dementia exists, and 2. Alzheimer's is like crippling autism. It took all of my strength not to punch her into the next universe. I felt incredibly insulted and was understandably furious. Everyone was shocked at how rude and misinformed she was. It should be obvious by this point that the narrator is using mansplain to mean patronizingly explain a concept, and I think it works. This girl is just as annoying as any other proponent of, well, actually. I'm planning a game night between friends. One friend is not part of my usual circle and questioned why I needed a vegetarian pizza. Another friend is a vegetarian. I don't know the small differences between vegan or veggie, and I explained that it was for her. Also, the veggie pizza is amazing. The out-of-circle friend, being a smug F-word, pointed out that pizza has cheese. Well, yeah, but the veggie friend is okay with milk and eggs as it doesn't kill the animal. And new guy is off. Eating eggs is murder. I say, what? It doesn't kill chickens to lay eggs. It kills the baby chicken. Oh God, man. Goodness gracious me. I did correct him, and he did accept the correction, but he was so excited to poke holes in my friend's diet just because of the vegetarian thing. Alaska isn't a state, it's a continent. Well, actually, the slaves didn't have it all that bad. The plantation owners took pretty good care of them because they paid good money for them, said my father-in-law. Both my husband and myself were speechless. I kind of still am. I said, I prefer vacations in some more mountainous areas than tropical, since I'm pretty scared of the ocean, sharks especially. My sister? Just go somewhere where sharks don't go, like Hawaii. Duh. My husband and I were having a party at our house. I'm a historian and have tons of old and unique things from around the world. A woman was looking at my collection of maps from around the place. I have a copy of the first map of the world and she asked why the edge was wavy. I told her the map maker knew the Earth was round and decided to make the edge wavy for accuracy. But the Earth is flat, says the lady. We're not friends anymore. First class in school, so I was around 7 or 8, and I remember we were doing fruit and I said tomato. My teacher ridiculed me, saying it was a vegetable, and everyone laughed at me. I knew I was right but said nothing. Screw that saggy old bag. Reading all of these makes me irrationally angry. I have to go. When I was in first grade, they taught us to read Goofy Goes to Cuba, and it talked about how he saw a bunch of alligators. I raised my hand. There's no such thing as a Cuban alligator. The teacher said, obviously there are. That's not true. Are you calling me a liar? No, just uneducated. I got kicked out of the classroom. I was so mad. That weekend, I got my mum to take me to the Louisville Zoo where I spoke to the reptile zookeeper and got him to write a letter and sign it for me. I brought it back to class the next Monday and the teacher still said that the reptile keeper, the specialist on the subject, might be mistaken. Why? Because Goofy Goes to Cuba said so. Frick. I was at a hair salon with my mother years ago. We started to talk about the movie Django because we'd both recently watched it. Then this random girl next to us says, it's pronounced Django. We both just looked at her first off for being rude and interrupting our conversation, but also for saying Django wrong and trying to correct us. I looked at her and said, the D is silent. Peer reviewing in high school, which is fine until you take a non-honors English course and other kids can't spell. I'm an English major, and in high school I knew I wanted to be an English major in the future, so you'd better believe I had a solid frickin' grasp on spelling and grammar. I can understand minor, uninformed corrections, but this one made me angry. I believe the sentence I wrote was something along the lines of, he was definitely lying. Definitely was spelt correctly with 2 I's. My sentence was corrected to, he is lying, with lying spelt wrong, with a question mark by my spelling of definitely that pointed to a note on the side that said, that's not a word, did you mean defiantly? I swear I've never been angrier in my life. A foreign student at my crappy community college randomly started lecturing me on the differences between where and were after I asked where I should go to make up a test. Unfortunately, he didn't really understand English as well as he thought and he had mixed them up. He thought I should have asked, where do I go to make up the test? There were a few other students around and none of them had the heart to stop him, so he went on condescendingly for a while about grammar while I just stood there confused and kind of annoyed at his audacity. He finally ended it by saying, it's okay, you'll get it eventually, as if he'd just explained some super complicated crap. I never bothered correcting him on it, but I wonder if he looks back and cringes about how hard he failed to correct someone on their own native language. My friend asked, are your niece and nephew identical or fraternal twins? I said, well, they're a boy and a girl, so obviously they're not identical. That's not true. Boy and girl twins can be identical. Another friend chimed in, I know it sounds weird, but it's true. If the zygote splits, they're identical. If there are 2 zygotes, they're fraternal. And I said, yes, but the zygote has 13 chromosomes from the father and 13 from the mother. You're telling me all the chromosomes are the same except one has an I and one has an X. That makes no sense. Friend number 2 corrected and said, I didn't think of that. The first one kept Googling but realized she was wrong. I mean, I know I didn't do too well in high school biology, but come on. When did a goofy army recruit nearly break their drill sergeant? I had one recruit paying attention to a bunch of geese rather than us. I made him get up and chase them all away. As they flew in the air, we made him follow them for several hundred feet to make sure they wouldn't come back. I was dying of laughter on the inside. I can pass along a classic bootcamp story. I was in the Navy, and in the Navy, your final inspection as a division is before the division officer, or DO, which is usually some junior officer nobody that got assigned that job, but we didn't know that at the time. Anyway, before the inspection, one of our RDCs, or the recruit division commanders, that's what we call the division officer in the Navy, found a locker out of sorts and decided to beat us in our dress blues. That was not fun, let me tell you. Wool uniforms. If we lost our cover, we'd get beat more. It was bad. Anyway, the DO rolls in for inspection, walks up to the first guy in formation, and the guy chucks up. However, this guy is a frickin' genius. He chucked up down the t-shirt in his dress blues, saving the DO from the chunks and us from getting beat even more. The division officer was so impressed at this guy's military bearing that he called the inspection right then and there. A grade of 5-star sailors all round. We still got beat that night, but that one dude was our chucking hero. Standing in formation at Fort Knox, about to head to the range, and everyone needed their gloves. One private comes out without them and the drill sergeant screams, "Private, where the frick are your gloves?" In this thick Tennessee accent he goes, "Well, damn, drill sergeant, I must have done left them son witches up in the stairs." The drill sergeant then just collapsed in tears of laughter. At boot camp, it was time to bunk down, and one of the division commanders showed up and was doing a walkthrough. It was just before lights out. He was going through the head, and then there was a loud scream of, "Oh my god, he's just cranking it over here. Get your frickin' Johnson out of your hands and out of my sight. Why the frick is your Frankfurter staring at me, recruit?" Lights out did not happen as scheduled, and I still talk to the guy who got caught many years later. He was also my bunkmate. A division commander in another division asked a guy if he'd shaved that morning, and the guy claimed he had. The division commander said, "Recruit, you are either a werewolf or you're lying, so which is it?" And the guy responded with, "I must be a werewolf, petty officer." Most of these are even funnier when you remember that the encounters are shortly followed by the poor recruit in question being screamed at and forced to run for a very long time afterwards. I was going through Air Force basic training, and when on guard duty, if an unauthorized person wanted to be let into the bunks, you had to report it to your drill sergeant. Our sister flight's drill sergeant came up while I was on guard and requested entry, so I reported to my sergeant and he had me ask the other a series of questions. This particular sergeant had a bushy mustache, so one question I had to ask was, in what year was Magnum PI cancelled? He dropped out of view from the window laughing, came back up and yelled, "It was never cancelled because I'm still here!" It took everything I had not to crack up. So when you start basic, your body doesn't know how to handle no sugar, caffeine, rigorous exercise, and sleeping schedules, so it's in shock. With this shock, crapping becomes a problem for a few people. Well, every DI after the first week is required to ask around if everyone has gone number 2, and from there he assigns one recruit to track who's gone number 2 and who hasn't. I crap you not, pun intended, we had one guy who'd stand in the barracks at the end of the night rolling off names of people who hadn't gone number 2 yet. Finally, we had another guy who's still on there after 2 weeks, and the drill instructor tells him to go to the doctor. The doctor gives him a get-out-of-jail-free card, essentially saying that at any point, if he says the magical words, "I've gotta go," he can escape any situation. Well, recruit No-Twosies, we'll call him, gets the smart idea that he's going to play his new trump card as long as possible. Every time we're getting grilled, it's, "I gotta go," ringing in from the back of the formation. This probably happened 6 times until our drill instructor caught on. Finally, the DI devises a plan that when recruit No-Twosies goes to the bathroom, he's going to have a couple of us hold onto his legs and slide him into the stall, exorcist style. The time comes and recruit No-Twosies excuses himself, we all follow our DI into the bathroom, and slide him under there like he's the spawn of Satan. This catches recruit No-Twosies by surprise. He doesn't know what the frick is going on as the DI is utterly berating him about lying and using this as an excuse to sit on the loo. Then we hear a very audible, "Oh, crap," from the stall. The DI scared the recruit so much he actually went twosies right then and there. The DI then made every recruit look at it and we played taps for it as we flushed it down the toilet. While in basic, we had a female that loved to smile. She was just a happy person in general. Well, my TI, or training instructor, came in and she caught the female trainee smiling. TI didn't like smiling. She walked up to the female trainee and yelled, "Wipe that smile off your face." The female trainee stopped smiling. The TI continued to yell, "No, literally wipe the smile off your face with your hand." The trainee does so. "Now throw it on the ground." Trainee follows orders. "Now stomp on it and scream, 'Die, smile, die' as loud as you can." The female trainee stood there for a few seconds before following through. Her tiny little voice cracks as she yelled, "Die, smile, die!" And I'll say it took everything I had not to burst out laughing. I had a guy in my Navy division, not really a big deal smiler, just his facial physiognomy. He looked like he was grinning. About the second phase of training, he made an effort to frown to stop the attention. At some point, the division commander asked him what he was smiling about. He responded with something like, "Not smiling, petty officer, I'm just ugly." I had a great team sergeant who had a floater, which is a wonky eye, that he was blind in from an injury in Iraq. So one eye was dead on and worked fine, but he had this one Uncle Ruckus eye that just did its own thing. He was a very physically imposing man with that classic drill sergeant bass-filled voice, and his crazy eye just added to it, and he knew. He told a story about his time as a drill sergeant when 2 privates had sat down on fire watch and were just kind of being real lackadaisical about their duties when he found them. So he started giving them the business, classic Full Metal Jacket style, and finally he just ended his rant right before he was about to smoke them for who knows how long, when one of the offending privates just says, "Drill Sergeant, are you yelling at us or the water fountain?" It stopped him dead in his rage and he just walked away mid-knife hand. We weren't allowed to talk during chow at the galley. You had to point at what you wanted, another recruit to pass you, and they had to silently pass it over. One recruit wanted a napkin and pointed. The other recruit asked, "This?" The Coast Guard drill sergeant immediately came over, circling him like a shark, screaming at him. They made him put like 10 saltines in his mouth and chew until his mouth was full, and then asked the first recruit if he wanted a napkin again. He could barely get it out, spitting pieces of cracker everywhere. Then they screamed at the first recruit to answer him, but we were all silently cracking up. It sounded like this. "So you want a napkin?" with pieces of saltine flying out. "Answer him!" My friend, cracking up, almost crying, "No, thank you." It was the best. We had 2 5'1" stocky blonde guys named Johnson in our company one cycle. Different platoons, no relation at all, but they looked really similar. One day during grass week, a couple of J-hats made them face each other and go back and forth screaming, "You're not Johnson, I'm Johnson. No, frick you, you're not Johnson, I'm Johnson." You have no clue how hard it was not to break into a million pieces after about 5 minutes of that. Oh boy. It's nice when theatre and military matters can come together. Also, in case you haven't noticed, the narrator has had to take the original language down about 60 notches for this video. I was a super light sleeper during basic training. One night I woke up for no reason. The sleeping bag was dark except for the light by the desk where the 2 soldiers on fire guard were supposed to be awake and alert. Both of them were leaning back in their chairs, dead asleep. I started to throw my covers off and go wake them up. If a drill sergeant came through and caught the fire guards sleeping, we'd all pay. But then I heard a slow scraping sound to my right, off in the darkness. I froze, heard it again, closer, and a few heartbeats later, I almost screamed out loud as I saw the sharp, intense face of our Samoan drill sergeant in the darkness. His face was covered in full camo. He was low-crawling underneath the line of bunk beds towards the fire guards. He had a bayonet in his teeth. We locked eyes and he silently raised a finger to his mouth, signaling for silence. I nodded and sat back to watch the show as the drill sergeant resumed his low crawl under and past my bunk in the direction of the sleeping guards. I have a bunch of stories of funny crap I did to correct soldiers when I later became an NCO myself, but that image, like something straight out of an 80s war movie, will always stick with me. In Navy boot camp, they called forced PT beatings. Everyone knows what a beating is. The Navy doesn't have drill instructors. They call them recruit division commanders, or DCs. One day, standing in ranks, the DC is going around asking random trivia questions about a test we had to take to make sure we had been studying. He gets to a guy who was eccentric, to say the least. This is about a month and a half into boot camp. DC asks the question, the guy gets it wrong, so DC yells, "No, wrong, beat yourself." Literally everyone knew this meant start doing push-ups, so the expectation is that he'll start doing push-ups, as the DC moves to the next guy in question. I was standing across from the guy and he had a confused look on his face. He looked at his own hand for 5 seconds, then hauled off and slapped himself in the face. It made a loud crack sound. He got himself good. I cracked and chuckled, trying to keep my composure at attention. The DC looked at me, then realized why I had laughed had to do with the slapping sound. He turned back to self-slapping guy and asked him if he slapped himself. The guy says, "You told me to beat myself." Cue the entire barracks cracking up. It was a single moment during boot camp where the curtain was raised and a moment of unadulterated levity came over everyone. The DC couldn't even help himself, so the tough guy persona melted away for a good 60 seconds until he regained composure and made us all do push-ups. The push-ups were an easy price to pay for that moment. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I work at a basic training range, and we had a drill sergeant yell at this soldier while they were getting ready to go down a buddy live fire exercise. The soldier froze and started crying. This 18-year-old kid was just in tears for getting yelled at. The drill sergeant yelled at him some more and he finally gave up because this kid wouldn't stop crying. So he made him scoop tears off his face and put them in his pockets till he filled his pockets up with tears. He did this for like an hour. It was hilarious. In my basic training class, I was a squad leader, which is essentially just a person who does extra chores. Anyways, for reasons unknown, myself and the other squad leaders were doing push-ups in the drill sergeant's office. Now, when you do these push-ups, you eventually reach muscle failure, so you just sort of hang out there in the front leaning rest and try to bust out another push-up every few seconds or so. We're all in there dying, and the drill sergeant says to one of my buddies, "Private Hudson, tell me what's the difference between basic training and being in prison." Without missing a beat, Private Hudson says, "Drill sergeant, in prison they get to watch TV." The drill sergeant cracked a little bit of a smile and then told us to get up and get out of there. During Air Force BMT, my flight was practicing marching one afternoon. As our flight was still fairly new, our marching was pretty terrible. One of the assistant TIs reamed us all out and then proceeded to awkwardly mock us by marching and walking like Jar Jar Binks while giving a spot-on impression. I'll never forget it. Not a drill sergeant, but when I was in basic, I saw 3 drill sergeants surrounding a private who was laying down, and they were all screaming, "Go the frick to sleep right now, private! You take a goddamn nap this very second, you poor tired soul!" Not the exact words, but you get the gist of it. I still wonder how he got himself into that predicament. When I was in boot camp and on forced marches, my drill instructors loved having conversations using the recruits as messengers. The DI at the end of the formation would send a recruit to the front to give the DI up there a message and back. They'd either have stupid conversations or talk trash using the recruit. During field training exercise, the drill sergeant told me to go get a trash bag, then go around and collect as many pine cones as I could. For like 3 hours, I had a bunch of trash bags. He then took a little walk around the grounds, contemplated for a bit, and then said he was mistaken and the grounds looked better with pine cones in them. He ordered me to redistribute all of the pine cones. We had this kid who kept wetting himself. One day, after the range, he informs our drill instructor that he'd crapped his pants right after the showers. Our squad bay starts to hold back laughter, only to be interrupted by, "It's not funny!" from the drill instructor. Awkward silence. Okay, it's a little funny, but we aren't laughing. That man never cracked a smile during the whole thing. I've got to say, that kid is either way more dumb, desperate, or determined than me if he's willing to join the frat bro armed forces with a condition like that. I hope things worked out for him in the long run. A buddy of mine told a story from when he was at basic. One guy had said, "Yes, ma'am," to the female drill sergeant earlier in the day, so when they were all lined up, she was going down the line asking each person if they'd called her ma'am earlier. The guy who did was fourth in line. He heard the previous guys say, "No, drill sergeant," and then he said in all seriousness, "No, ma'am." You see, what I'm getting from these stories is that the military training is like joining a non-consensual improv troupe. In the US Air Force, I heard a training instructor ask, "Are you finished yet?" A trainee by the name of Dunn said, "No, sir, my name is Dunn." The training instructor walked away to avoid laughing. There was this idiot in my basic training group that after he'd fired his rifle up on his shoulder, pointed the wrong way, towards the drill sergeant clearing it, with the mag still in the weapon. The drill sergeant, a 6'8" bodybuilder, slammed this idiot into the sandbags, screaming at him, and then the recruit had to lay prone in the dirt while holding a stick for a rifle, periodically saying "bang" for the next 3 hours. Somehow, he still graduated with us. Here's a story from my perspective as a recruit in the Navy boot camp. We had an inspection the following day, so our chief was going around inspecting inside everyone's rack to make sure it was squared away. Eventually, he made it over to my section. He was checking the rack, a bunk bed that opens up beside me, and had it propped open so I couldn't see his face, and he must have kind of forgot I was there. He's searching through this one guy's stuff and sees his small gloves. And he asks, "You know what they say about small gloves?" Now, keep in mind, I don't think any of my division commanders heard me talk up until this point, and I said without any hesitation, "I know that's not true. I wear a size 12 boot, but I can tell you right now I don't have a size 12 Johnson." And my chief slammed the rack shut and looked at me. "What the frick?" He then stormed off to the fishbowl, and all you could hear was him trying to hold back his laughter in the office with the 2 petty officers. "What is that disgusting crud all over your glasses, maggot?" "I believe it's your saliva, drill sergeant, sir." Closes eyes and waits for death. I saw 2 guys laugh when a division commander walked in, so he had them stand almost noses touching each other. One would yell, "Want to hear a joke?" and the other would yell, "Ha, ha, ha," repeatedly for hours. It was hilarious at first, but once their voices started to crack, it got old pretty quick. On day 2 of basic training at Lackland Air Force Base, my flight was returning with our newly issued gear after having our heads shaved and other hurry-up-and-wait tasks. Our training instructor told us to go upstairs and stand at attention by our beds. We ran up there tired after attempting to march what felt like 2 miles each way in the August Texas heat. We were all standing there waiting for whatever's going to happen next. After about 5 minutes, Donnie Barnes says, "That Sergeant Gates is a jerk, am I right?" And you would not believe what happened. As soon as Barnes said Gates, the locker directly behind Barnes's pops open with a creak. Barnes is frozen solid. Out of the locker pops one leg after another, and the 3 taps as Sergeant Gates walks out of the locker and puts his mouth directly next to Barnes's ear and shouts in his gravelly voice, "On your face!" We did so many push-ups. One recruit left his training guide just lying on his rack. My lead division commander decided this was punishable by making the recruit stand in the middle of our berthing, holding the training guide in the left hand, saluting with the right, and then bringing it in and gently whispering, "I love you, training guide. I'm sorry I left you out. I'll never leave you lying around again." That crap was hilarious, especially because we were all put at attention while he did it for 45 minutes. Drill instructor made a recruit stand in front of a tree, pointing, saying, "I'm not funny, you are," when he was caught laughing. The drill instructor did actually laugh at that one. Early on in boot camp, we were post-shower and at attention for the hygiene inspection, wearing nothing but skivvies and t-shirts. The DI is walking the line checking fingernails and whatnot, when one private's Stiff Johnson flops out of his skivvies right as the DI passes him. The DI stops, looks the private in the eye and says, "Private, I don't even like you, much less like you that way. Now put that goddamn thing away before it goes off." The private in question turned purple with embarrassment and tries to stuff his rigid tree trunk back in his skivvies, but he's getting flustered as the guy starts yelling at him for being an incompetent private, and that if he didn't get stowed in 3 seconds, the private would be taking a 10-minute cold shower. Things like, "Do I have to hose you down like an excited chihuahua? Should I call the vet? Good God, private, is that how you greet your mother at night? Stow your gear, goddammit!" Every other private in line was trying not to laugh, and the senior drill instructor had retreated to his office where we could hear him howling with laughter. The private finally gets his junk stowed, and the DI resumes inspection, and you could see he was trying his damnedest not to burst out laughing. Nobody got much sleep that night. There were too many gigglers in their bunks and too many quiet one-liners. Oh boy, you'd think the terror would do something to soften things up down there, but I guess this particular python was paralyzed in fear. I went to Army Basic. I was in the chow line, nut to butt, looking at the back of the guy's head in front of me. All of a sudden, I could feel one of my drill sergeants breathing on me over the separation wall, and he yells, "Carlton, who is your daddy?" To which I responded, "You are, drill sergeant!" My other drill sergeant sprints over and says, "Oh yeah? What does that make me then?" And all I could think to say was, "My mommy, drill sergeant?" Every drill sergeant in the chow hall was dying, and I got the dog crap smoked out of me outside. I have plenty more, either equally funny or possibly even funnier. Like when I was in AIT to be a medic at Fort San, we had to tote a line for bed checks, which is standing on a yellow line by your bunk in your personal training clothes and shower shoes holding your ID card with your tags hanging out, and we used to mess with each other hard in our bay, and right before tote a line, one of my buddies hid one of my shower shoes. So I was in a rush and thinking, frick, okay, I'll just wear one. So I'm standing at half attention in one flip-flop, and my bare foot is just kind of tucked away behind me. Our cadre for check comes up and just looks directly down at my feet, crosses his arms and says, "Carlton, what in the Sam hell are you doing?" All I could get out was to say, "Sergeant, I couldn't find my other shower shoe for bed check," and I think I'd been saving this one up, because he started to smirk and just yelled, "God damn it, Carlton, you're more ate up than a chocolate member in a gay bar," triggering giggles and snickers all throughout the bay. Thankfully, our school cadre were a lot more chill than drill sergeants. We had a TI and TI in training with us when we were marching to a class. Some people were out of step, so the TI started screaming, "Don't you know your right from your left? Did the antenna fall out of your house when you were a kid? Didn't your mommy and daddy let you watch 3-2-1 Contact?" The TI in training lost it, and so did I. I asked my dad about this. He was a recruit division commander. He shrugged and says, "Oh, I laughed. Your hat is called your cover? It's the first day. I wanted some recruits from the back to the front to carry stuff. I said, 'Get up here with your covers,' and they went and grabbed their bed sheets." Ladies, when did you get friend-zoned by a guy? Guys on the internet need a huge reality check. Here's mine. I had this crush on my study buddy in college, and one night he casually looked at me and said to me, "You know why we're such great study buddies? Because we never have to worry about physical attraction or banging each other." See, in my experience, a solid majority of males are oblivious to hints that chicks think are blatantly obvious. I was talking to my boyfriend the other day about before we got together, and a lot of the things I did to try and let him know I was mega into him, they weren't even noticed. In the end, a simple, "I'm into you, we should go out," does the trick really well. Long story short, men suck at getting clues from women partly because of evolution and social dynamics. So, ladies, don't throw hints, throw bricks. Otherwise, we'll never know, and then you get the guys who assume every woman wants their babies, and the rest who assume that nobody loves them. This one guy would come over to my house and insist on cuddling and watching movies the whole time. He'd keep me up all night on the phone because he slept better when he could hear my voice, and then send me good morning texts and hold my hand whenever the opportunity presented itself. Then he told his best friend that he wished I'd just get over it. I was in love with my best friend for 3 years. We did everything together. We went to the movies, had Doctor Who nights, went hiking. He'd even stopped by to talk to me at work and texted me every night about which episodes of Star Trek were on. He told me all of his crap and I told him mine. He helped me out of my depression, and when I became an unspeakable act victim, he was the first person I told. We gave each other gifts and everyone thought we were dating. He even encouraged the image when we were out in public, but it never went anywhere. Instead of telling me he simply wasn't attracted to me, we continued a charade of couple-like behavior. He started dating someone and I felt the need to be blunt, blunter than I'd already been. I told him I loved him, and then he didn't talk to me for a year. He got married in September. Oh, and I'm engaged now, so I guess it all worked out for the best in the end. Haha, well, we're all happy for you. The narrator should note he generally doesn't think the friend zone is a thing, especially in the cases where he hears guys talking about women they've been nice to, not wanting to jump into bed with them, but it did make for a good, well-known concept to introduce the video with. One of my good friends left for the army. I know how lonely you can feel in the military, so I decided to drop over $500 to go halfway across America to a crappy city in Georgia that's basically the first level of hell. It was one tumbleweed-filled mall, a few fast food restaurants, and my hotel. That hotel was not great, but it was worth it to see him just for a few days. We'd been friends since middle school. He was there when my boyfriend broke my heart. I was there when his girlfriend did the same. It was a beautiful friendship, really, and people often made comments about us being a couple. I kinda got sucked into the thought, to be honest. Anyways, I go to a crappy city in Georgia just to spend a few days with him. We have a sweet running reunion jump hug combo. He shows me off to a few of his army friends. We get shakes and burgers together at this old-fashioned Ma and Pa diner, and the next day all we do is cuddle and laugh. We held hands through this crappy one-horse mall. He helped me pick out a cute summer dress. I even initiated a kiss or two. It was like a frickin' movie. It was beautiful. I even wrote a poem that night. I was so inspired by the overflow of emotions. A few months later, he comes back home. I invited him over to have a Skyrim party with a few friends. Denied. Oh, invited him to go dinner? Nope. Okay, hang out? Watch movies and cuddle? Make hot cocoa? Drive-by high five? Nada. Nothing. Zip. I didn't get to see him for about 2 months and he lived right down the road. Turns out his ex, who was dating his best friend while he was gone, told him to stop hanging out with me, and after I asked him about it, I got the classic, "We make better friends than a couple anyways." Frickin' frick. In short, I spent way too much frickin' money to see a guy who wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. You know, multiple men have told me that I'm just like a bro. Different guys and girlfriends seem undecided on whether this means I was getting hit on or friend-zoned. I had the biggest crush on my friend in college. I'd invite him over to study several times. Imagine Cher in Clueless with the hair tossing and the rolling off the bed. Nothing ever came of it, and I thought he just missed the signals. A couple of years later, drunk at a New Year's party, I confessed what I thought was my biggest secret. He admitted that he knew all along and had deftly avoided my advances. It was embarrassing for all involved. Weirdest ever. I'd been hanging out with this guy for almost a year. He liked me and I liked him. I went over to his house once for his birthday, we went to his room and made out a bit. The door was cracked and in came his dog. The dog then started to growl and bite my ankles. A week later I asked if he wanted to be more than friends and he, exact quote, said, "We can't date. My dog hates you. I'm afraid he might hurt you. I hope we can stay friends. I like you, but I love my dog." Friend-zoned by a frickin' dog. I kept getting friend-zoned by this guy that I liked and had been friends with for about 3 years. My feelings didn't start right away. I got vibes from him, or at least I thought they were vibes. One night we were both wasted and we ended up sleeping together, and I thought to myself, oh my god, this is it. He's gonna tell me he has feelings for me too. He ended up telling me that he's gay and that he wasn't trying to force something that wasn't there. But after our drunken encounter, he realized he wasn't even attracted to girls. This really was the best outcome, as now we're best friends and he found himself in the process. I fell hard for a boy. We spent a collective 2 months in a casual fling, spread over 5 months. He serenaded me. A few days later, he tells me that he wants to get back with his ex. Whatever, get over him. Mostly. All is well. Then 6 months later, he calls me and tells me he needs someone to talk to. I, of course, go with him. He drives me around while ranting about his, once again, ex-girlfriend. We drive past a place where apparently they did the deed in a parking lot, and he tells me all about it. He spends about 2 hours telling me why he's crazy about this girl and why she makes him so mad. And then he takes me home and never talks to me again. Yay! This one guy walked me home in order to ask for my friend's phone number. I went on a couple of dates with one guy I'd met through friends, or so I thought. We proceeded to hook up, and then 3 days later he was dating another girl. He thought we were both just lonely and hanging out. I thought he was the bee's knees. We're great friends to this day, but I cried every time I saw him for the longest time. I've friend-zoned guys before myself, but never since that day. I make it a point to be very upfront and honest. I didn't realize how much worse than heartbreak the friend zone felt. The last couple of weeks, I've been on 5 to 6 dates with this guy, a cop that I've known for years. Yesterday, he texted me, "I'm really enjoying hanging out with you. I know we're not boyfriend-girlfriend material, but I can see us being great friends." Today, he asked me out for lunch and told me about the date he had last night. He told me it wasn't a romantic date, just a friend date, like what we do. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm being friend-zoned. Unlike most people, when I like someone like that and I learn that they don't like me like that back, I usually stop hanging out with them. I don't want to torture myself. So no, I haven't been friend-zoned. I think it's a choice. You can accept it and move on, or live in a fantasy hell you've created all on your own. What I've learned from this thread is when guys get friend-zoned, it's, "Derp, you're such a great guy and would be the perfect boyfriend, but you're just not the right one for me. In other words, you're nice but I'm not attracted to you, but let's still hang out." And when girls get friend-zoned, "Derpet, even though we've already been hanging out like crazy and have done things that are wildly inappropriate for a normal friendship, hand-holding, cuddling, making out, or sleeping together, I don't want to have a relationship with you." I can't say which is worse, but they both suck a lot. After getting the opportunity to read almost all of these stories, my opinion is, when this happens to you, just cut said perpetrator out of your life until you absolutely have no more feelings for them. It sucks to lose a friend, but it sucks more to be emotionally used and neglected. I mean, I guess both of these suck, but the narrator has definitely kept up healthy friendships after being turned down or sleeping with someone. I think it might vary from person to person, but if you're mentally strong enough to just accept that things can't be like that, it can work. God damn, I keep reading these stories and for some reason I keep hoping it'll end out okay. Disney has not prepared me for this. This kinda goes along with this thread. I totally friend-zoned this girl in high school. I'd gone to elementary and middle school with her as well, and she was always sort of the weird girl of the girly group. She wasn't chubby, but she wasn't skinny either. Anyway, fast forward 2 years, she plays the trombone in the high school band and has one of her friends give me this note asking me to the Sadie Hawkins. I said no, mostly because I wasn't planning on going at all, but also because she was just a little out there for my tastes. In college, I met her at a bar once, and now she's frickin' gorgeous, smart, and hilarious. I think ultimately, I lost. We decide in the present situation, not the future, and what we decide today might change that. I refused a girl who used me as her motivation to get better. I got refused, and now I'm using that to get better myself. It's always a win-win situation. Alright ladies, this is friend-zoning. I had a massive crush in high school, head over heels. We became friends because I learned that on TV, friendship leads to being girlfriend-boyfriend. Curse you, 90s romantic comedies that promised me the shy, quiet loner, when applied a montage makeover sequence could get anything of their dreams. It became clear that this person didn't like me in that way, but wanted to stay friends. That sucks, but okay. I hit on another person almost a year later, and my former crush breaks down in tears because they're afraid they'll lose me and doesn't like seeing me with other people. Because I'm young and naive, I take this for hope that I've actually got a shot with her. Nope. Next 2 years of constant rebuffs, the slightest hints that I'm attracted to anyone else leads to waterworks. Now that is friend-zoning. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. You know, I may or may not have friend-zoned a girl a few years ago without even realizing it at the time. I worked at an animal hospital when I was in high school. There was one other girl who was my age, and we became good friends, joking around at work. After a few months, rumors started to spread that we liked each other, and I laughed them off as my coworkers being nosy. I didn't like her. So one day, she came up to me and asked me if I'd like to get pizza after work. We hadn't hung out outside of work, so I said sure. It was fun, but at work, everyone called it a date. I said I wasn't sure and that we were just friends. She obviously heard this, so she asked if I'd like to go on a date with her. I told her I wasn't really looking for a relationship at the time. Right around this time, I left the hospital and we drifted apart. I started dating a girl from my school shortly thereafter. A few weeks later, I decided to try and talk with the girl at the animal hospital, and she was very upset with me. Apparently, she'd had to work up the courage to ask me out for a long time, and the fact that I told her I wasn't looking for anything and then started dating someone so soon after hurt her feelings a lot. I've never felt worse, and to be honest, I kind of wish I could go back and take her on a date. She was and is an awesome girl. I've never been friend-zoned before because I'm not pretty or extroverted enough for guys to be my friends. Yay, loneliness! A college friend and I reconnected over Facebook after 8 years. He ended up married to his college girlfriend, no big deal. We kept in touch via Messenger on occasion and were chatting. Nothing inappropriate, but we actually became quite good friends. I met up with him when he visited my town on business. I was engaged then, so he also met my then fiancée. He was the emotional support through that horrendous breakup, and I was his emotional support when he went through his divorce. His wife of 10 years cheated on him twice. Throughout that time, he told me stuff like, "You're the perfect girl," and "Why are you still single?" and all that nonsense. We made plans for him to come to my apartment and drink whiskey and watch ridiculous movies when he was emotionally ready for that. Only it never happened. He started dating a girl 10 years younger than him and me, telling me about how every guy wants her and what does she see in me? She's so attractive. That was the point I cut all communication and moved the frick on with my life. You know, this kind of thing happened to me all the time until my second year of college. I graduated this past spring. The worst one was that I was so in love with my closest male friend in high school, I did end up telling him about 6 months after I met him, but I knew he was after another girl. When things with her didn't work out, about 3 months later, he acted reciprocal towards me, even telling me he'd like to date me, but had some other things to work out for himself and his feelings first. Well, fast forward another 3 months and he ends up falling for another girl. About a year into their relationship, he tells me while I'm at his brother's birthday with him that there's something about me he finds attractive and would like to investigate. Oh, and also that he could never see himself staying with his current girl forever. I never really got the hint and moved on until after he eventually did marry that same girl. They've been divorced for about 2 years now. I had an absolutely massive 4-year-long crush on a friend of mine. I got worse than friend-zoned though. "You're just like a sister to me." Just recently, he came out of the closet and he asked me if I'd think it was okay if he hooked up with my brother. I'm a guy and I've apparently friend-zoned a few females before. Although I hate the use of the term friend-zone, I much prefer the term selective dating. There have been a few females before who, even though they are very attractive women, I'd felt I'd benefit more from a friendship with them than a relationship. I feel it's important for myself to have a mix of male and female friends, and although some of you might find this hard to comprehend, I truly believe this is the best path to a healthy lifestyle. Yeah, the narrator maintains his disagreement that either party can expect a relationship without actually having a conversation about it. People who say they're friend-zoned often feel entitled to something from the other, but most of the time neither party has actually asked the other one out or set up a firm boundary. It is messy and complicated, but friend-zoning is generally just a term used by people who've never laid out their feelings on the table to begin with. I've had my current job for about 7 months now. I'm a secretary in a doctor's office. It's a bigger office and there's a few doctors there, and one of them has this amazingly hot son who comes in to help out every now and again when he's not in school. He and I became good friends over time, and I inevitably developed feelings for him, which I assumed were mutual judging by his constant flirting and compliments. So you can imagine my surprise when he pulls me aside one day and asks for my advice because he's planning on proposing to the girlfriend I didn't know existed until that very moment. If I'd had gonads, they would have shriveled up and crawled back inside me. Hello, friendzone, you merciless son of a witch. You know, a guy has to be pretty out of touch to not realize that no girl can get any guy she wants. The whole friend zone thing stems from the idea that if a guy does the right thing, the girl will fall for him. Like pickup artist moves, it ignores the fact that women care what you look like and don't want all the same behaviors from a guy. But my favorite story about a guy not being interested was I was once set up with a guy on a group trip. From the second we met, I realized he wasn't interested and I was willing to switch to friend mode. The guy proceeded to make it so awkward that I had to avoid him entirely. It was like he thought I was going to lunge on him if I got within 5 feet of him. Totally in love with the guy who introduced me to Reddit. He pays for my meals, cooked me dinner once, offered to meet my parents the last time he picked me up for dinner. Sounds not so bad, right? Last week we were at a bar with some friends, and he brought up the birthday gift I gave him and said, "Yep, she's the greatest friend ever," and tried to give me a high five. I witnessed my own friend-zoning moment. Actually, eventually I did tell him how I felt, and I did not get the response I would have hoped for. I cried a whole bunch. A friend of mine in high school knew I was madly in love with him, so he just manipulated me as much as he could to get what he wanted out of me. So, yeah. I was seriously attracted to a coworker and we became fast friends. We hung out a lot, went on travels together, shared hotel rooms, but he never busted a move on me. Finally, on a trip to Vegas with him, I got sort of drunk and kissed him. He pushed me away and said that he didn't feel that way about me. I was pretty crushed and embarrassed, so he just held me until I fell asleep. I was really confused. I've never had a problem with men before. This was the only guy who didn't at least want to sleep with me, so I went and convinced myself that he must be gay. He was attractive, but never had anything to do with women. Flash forward a few years, he's engaged to an absolutely stunning, cool as heck, really accomplished woman. Turns out he wasn't gay. He just had really high standards in women and really high standards in personal behavior. Also, yes, I'm well aware that assuming he was gay because he wasn't into me makes me a scumbag moxie. Live and learn. Similar situation from the perspective of the guy in the story. I worked with this girl at summer camp last year and we hung out all the time. Let's call her Jenna. I let her know early on I wasn't interested, but she was convinced otherwise. I'd told Jenna face to face twice that I didn't like her. Fast forward to the beginning of the fall semester and I'm moving into a new apartment. She comes over to help me move in, still thinking that I'm set on her, and we get into an argument when I refuse to make out with her. 3 hours of Jenna telling me I was lying to myself, that I really did like her no matter what I said, and how she didn't want to miss any opportunities, though she knew I wasn't interested. No, witch, you're just crazy. So, let me get this straight. The guys of Reddit can share their friend zone stories, but if the ladies do, we get told he just didn't want to date a fatty, or quiet girls that have a crush on someone and then that someone starts dating another girl isn't considered friend zoning, it's you needing to man up, or something along these lines. Get a grip, guys, you're all just as guilty as us ladies. I've noticed a lot of the female stories are quickly being shot down with, "That's not friend zoning, you just don't understand," when in reality their stories are 95% the same as the male friend zoning stories on here. One of the main perspectives that I've noticed keeps popping up here is that apparently guys often mention how weird it would be to date a lady that's taller than they are. Please stop this. Although I do usually tender a reply along the lines of, "It doesn't matter how tall we are lying down," automatically unfriend-zoned. Also, I'm 6'1" and I've heard this line more often than I'd like to. It can be a real bummer. Girls don't get friend-zoned, they get F-buddied. There was a girl in my class who kept on glancing at me and giggling and stuff, and then I found notes with hearts and things in my locker, in my bag, on my desk. I knew it was that girl because I recognize her handwriting. She wrote things like, "I love you," "I want to be your slave," and things gradually got sicker. "Pull down my dress and kiss my forest," or "When are we going to get married? I'm all ready for you down there if you know what I mean." She was actually a weirdo in my class, very scary, and I had no heart for her. So I just walked up to her and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm unable to accept your transaction of love. My heart cannot proceed with such a course. I hope it's okay to keep some distance away from each other as friends." One of my best guy friends in high school who I had a little bit of a crush on said to me, "Hey, guess what just happened?" I said, "What?" I asked Alison to prom and she said, "Yes, we're going to the movies this weekend too." Great! Notice how few to none of these stories have segments of anger and bitterness where the girls decry all men as only liking witches, and how all the nice girls can't get anyone. I fell for a religious 15-year-old guy, told him about my crush, and he replied, "That's inappropriate." That was a slap in the frickin' face. When did you catch someone casting shade at you in another language? Once on the subway in New York City, this young guy was telling his friend in French, "Ugh, who would wear red pants?" I turned to him and said, "You'd better watch out, you're not the only one that speaks French." His friend then gets extremely embarrassed and says, "I told you so." ASL here, you'd be surprised at how many deaf people freely talk crap about everyone. It really is a different culture. I'm American, I was in Paris on the metro, and I heard these drunk American girls talking about me. I glanced at them and heard one of them say, "Do you think he's listening?" And her friend said, "No, we're speaking English. He probably only understands French." I don't even speak French. Backpacking in China, a little girl near me asked her dad, "What kind of person is that?" And I answered in Chinese, "I am an American." I get these from kids all the time in Korea. Usually they point and yell, "Hey mom, it's a foreigner." The mum starts laughing instead of smacking their kid for being rude. In response, my boyfriend and I look at each other in horror and then yell in Korean, "What? It's a Korean person!" Usually the mum and kid go eyes wide and are shocked. Living in Germany for a few years, I could understand German. Was traveling in a barn somewhere near Augsburg. A little girl around the age of 5 or 6 with her mother sat opposite me and pointed at me and asked why I was so black. The mother patiently explains about Afro-Americans and slavery and freedom. The girl waves at me while leaving. I'm Indian. German here. It's astonishing how many people think they're safe if they speak English. They must be aware that English is a universal business language, besides French in a lot of countries, right? Besides that, I listen to a lot of relationship things which people should probably discuss in privacy. As a guy who's worked in tourism in an undisclosed European country, I have overheard way too many glimpses into people's personal lives that I honestly don't think I should have been party to. You've been warned, English-speaking tourists. I'm Hispanic and fluent in both English and Spanish, and people often think I don't speak Spanish. So there was this one time I was at a laundromat folding clothes, while these 2 Hispanic ladies are at a table across from me folding their clothes. Both of them are speaking loudly in Spanish, so I couldn't help but overhear what they were talking about. They started talking about alcohol. One of them said ever since she got married and had a kid, she had stopped drinking. The other lady was saying that she loved getting drunk and couldn't live without alcohol, that she wanted a boyfriend so that he could buy her alcohol and take care of her kid. Then they both started talking about their ideal boyfriend. One of them said she was lucky to have found her husband because he's everything she wanted in a guy. The other chick was listing off a huge checklist for her perfect guy, like hot, must worship her, buy her everything, amazing job, cook, clean, take care of kids, etc. She then was interrupted by her friend saying that she was never going to find the perfect one with her list being so long. She then turns and looks towards me saying, "What about a guy like him?" Her friend immediately rejected that idea and began to make fun of my clothes, hair, glasses, everything. I'm a pretty nerdy-looking dude, admittedly. She then says how I look like a loser who's doing nothing with his life, probably that I'm poor and won't be able to buy her things, and more. I think to myself that this chick is real rude, and I loudly reply in Spanish, "I wouldn't be into a chick like you because I wouldn't want a lazy drunk for a girlfriend." She got silent and just stared at me. Her friend began to laugh uncontrollably. Not me, but I heard from my dad, a stamp collector and an associate curator at the Carnegie Museum. They sold off the collection a long time ago. A group of Polish falcons wanted to see the museum's Polish collection and started trash-talking, in Polish of course, about how badly their country's stamps were presented. The Carnegie Museum had at the time absorbed the entire Smithsonian stamp collection. The curator, who was a Hungarian, spoke English, French, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, and a few other Eastern European languages. After a minute or two, he walked over to the group and kindly asked them to leave in perfect formal Polish. The curator's parting shot was, "The last cultured Pole was Copernicus." I'm bilingual, English and French. I was in the hospital recovering from surgery, high as F on morphine, when the shift change occurred. The 2 nurses were talking in French, one briefing the other on the 4 patients in the room, who'd all been speaking English with their visitors. The briefing included color commentary about our personalities, some of it being relevant to our medical status, like, "The woman in bed 2 hasn't gone to the bathroom yet on her own, she used a commode, because she's being a big baby. The man in bed 3 has problems hitting the bowl, and it might be better to have a catheter put back in than to have housekeeping come back every hour. Oh, and he's a jerk for thinking it's funny." When they got to me, Nurse 1 said that I was high as frick and hilarious, and that Nurse 2 would enjoy any conversations I had with my dad if he came back. I sat up and said, "Thank you, my dad thinks I'm funny too," in French, and laid back down. They both stood awkwardly and then said, "You'll be discreet?" I nodded and said, "For more pudding." More pudding arrived presently. Oh yeah, all the time. My other language that I speak is Hungarian, which is really obscure and not really related to any other languages beyond vague grammatical ties to Finnish and Estonian, and there are less than 15 million native speakers, of which just under 10 million live in Hungary. So Hungarian speakers will often just assume it's a secret language when outside Hungary, and that no one else will understand because 99% of the time it's true. That said, there are enough Hungarians in some places like San Francisco that it's best to not assume, and I overheard people quite a lot in the summer that I worked there. I remember, for example, hearing a couple arguing on a Saturday night in the grocery store in the tone that you'd normally be having an argument at home in, but they assumed that no one else understood them. I've overheard hugely emotional goodbyes and confessions in train stations and airports that likewise should have been at home. You sort of really just cringe and turn up the music loudly on your MP3 player, because telling them to stop would just be more awkward for everyone involved. My mum and dad had the best story like this, though, when they were in Austria for their first Christmas as a married couple. Apparently, the table next to them at Christmas dinner in a restaurant there was a man by himself who had a German shepherd, and he was letting the dog literally eat the food off his plate and all sorts of things like that. So my mum spent the entire dinner complaining about this guy letting his dog do all of these things in a restaurant, in Hungarian, but at the end of the meal, as he got up, the man came over to the table and said, "Kelemes karaksoni unipeket kivanok," and left. In Hungarian, that's the polite way of wishing someone a happy Christmas holiday. Props to that guy, and props to my mum for telling this story to us kids so we don't rely on our secret language too much in public. I worked as an English teacher in a Japanese high school. I wanted my students to use only English in class, so I never let them know I understood and spoke Japanese. For a year, I overheard them talk about how long they thought my member was, whether I had a Japanese girlfriend, and so on. At the end of the school year, with all of the students gathered in the gym, the principal asked me to make a farewell speech as I was returning to my home country. So I stepped up to the mic and delivered my speech in fluent Japanese. Have you ever seen 800 jaws drop at the same time? It was glorious. Haha, I bet your glee gave you a really weird energy while delivering that speech, and that you were looking forward to it right up to the point where it happened. God, it would have been funny to see the view of a gobsmacked audience like that. Then again, you plonking a camera on the lectern for us to see it would have raised suspicion. I picked up a summer job at a local fast food joint this summer while on break from college. I'm a white guy from Southern California, and while not fluently bilingual, I do speak a fair bit of Spanish. During my first day, the rest of the workers, as I found out later, thought I was the owner's son and treated me like I was a king, which really confused me at the time. After they came to the realization that I was just a normal guy at a part-time job, the chitter-chatter started and some began to complain to each other that I shouldn't be there, getting territorial as if I were intruding because I wasn't like them. One woman in particular really didn't like me. About a week into the job, I overheard her saying something about me being a jerk and getting in her way. Later on that day, she told me to help her with bringing something to the kitchen from the freezer downstairs because she was busy. To which I responded in Spanish, "But you called me a jerk. Why would I help you do your job?" She was taken aback and kind of stammered off, embarrassed and muttering under her breath. It felt good to confront her and watch her get all red in the face. After that happened, people didn't seem to mind me that much. My uncle was on the other side of this. My family is Dutch, and when my aunt and uncle were living in London, she taught him the phrase in Dutch for something along the lines of, "The fat woman is a B-word," which they'd employ easily without anyone knowing what they were talking about. At least until they went to Amsterdam and the tour guide at the Anne Frank Museum got a bit surly and he momentarily forgot which country he was in. In short, my uncle called a tour guide at the Anne Frank house a fat female dog in her first language. I spent a few years in Seoul, Korea, and gained near fluency after about a year of immersion. Most days on the streets I'd hear something about the size of my nose or my blue eyes. Usually it was satisfying enough to look right at the speaker until they paused, and then I'd just introduce myself and ask them about their day. I did end up meeting a lot of cool people. In some situations it was a game. One of my Korean friends was fluent in English. We used to take the bus together and talk about whatever, just to see what happened with the crowd. He spoke English and I replied in Korean. It really messed with other passengers' heads. Good times. My mum speaks an obscure dialect of Chinese, although not very well since she learned English upon going to school. But she can still usually understand anyone else speaking the Cantonese dialect. One day we went to a market in Chinatown and my mum was trying to order something, but the people had a hard time understanding her because of her obscure dialect. At that point, the old ladies behind us started talking smack about us in Cantonese. My mum said what she got out of it was, "That lady is very Americanized, her Chinese is terrible, and her daughter, me, is clearly half white and because of that she's ugly." We turned around and gave them the stink eye. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm a high school English teacher with mostly Hispanic students, and you'd never know it by looking at me, but I also speak Spanish. I never advertise this to my classes until something like this comes up. I've caught students talking crap about other teachers, about me, trying to cheat on tests and papers, all kinds of stuff. One time that stands out was when a student warned another one not to try cheating, and she responded with, "Es un grito no sabe nada." He's a little white boy, he doesn't know anything. I looked at her and responded, "Sabes que esto grito entiende todo lo que dices." You know, this white boy understands everything you say. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by some kid in the back going, "Oh, shit!" and then the whole class erupted. I was hiking at the Grand Canyon with my friend and my brothers a few years back, and there was a small group of young Japanese girls, high school age, hiking behind us. On the way down, I hear them talking about how attractive my brother is and giggling. I find it funny, but I didn't say anything. They keep talking about him, and then later my friend, and chatting about who gets who, and still I say nothing. We get to a small overlook with a rock ledge sticking out that's sort of hard to access, and my daredevil brother manages to climb around the backside to get a better picture. One of the Japanese girls sees him and says she wants to go over there too, but she looks like she's going to jump to it, which seems dangerous, so I told her in Japanese that she should go to the other side to climb up. Those girls were absolutely stunned and looked beyond embarrassed. They knew I'd understood everything. I'll never forget it. As a brown guy living in Japan, most people assumed I was a tourist and didn't speak Japanese. I used to overhear all kinds of weird and interesting conversations on the train. My favorite would have to be overhearing two Japanese schoolgirls talking about how hairy my legs were and wondering if it would be possible to make a carpet out of it. I didn't know if I should be flattered or offended. I gave them a wink as I walked out at my stop. I felt pretty badass. Haha, you're a lot more confident than the narrator. I would have burned a deep crimson if I heard people making comments about my body like that. Good lord. I was at Disney World on a school trip and there was a German father and son standing in front of us in line. They were looking around and muttering all kinds of insults, the usual fat, stupid American bullcrap. Now, having been an exchange student in Germany for a year, I perfectly understood everything they said. So I turned to my friend and started not so subtly insulting them in English, making sure they could hear me. The father turned around and said to me, "You may not understand us, but we understand you." I looked him right in the eye and said with a big smile on my face, "Machen Sie bitte keinen Aufstand, ja? Let's not make a scene, okay?" He just kind of turned around in bewilderment, like the idea that an American could be bilingual, least of all in German, had never occurred to him once in his life. I heard them muttering a couple more insults, like Scheißkerl, Arschloch, Idiot, but they didn't really say anything to us after that. It seemed they kind of made it a point to pretend we didn't even exist. Mandarin speaker. It happens all the time. The weirdest time, though, I was in a clothing store in Tokyo and a family came up and asked me a question in Japanese. I had no idea what they were saying, and then they started talking amongst themselves in Chinese about how I could possibly be in Tokyo without understanding Japanese. Yep, I hear ya. I can speak Polish, and by speaking Polish you can in varying degrees understand Ukrainian, Czech, Slovakian, and to a small degree Russian. I've heard things directed at me once or twice. On one particular occasion, two Ukrainian girls were talking about me on the subway, but I wasn't letting them know that I understood. When I had to get off the train, I simply smiled at them and said, "I understood everything you two were talking about," and left. Their faces dropped. Total opposite of this, but my best friend is Polish, and her mother doesn't even speak English very well. She brought us to IKEA one day and brought us lunch, so I asked my friend how to say, "Thank you very much, I appreciate it." I should have known better, but she goes, "Yeah, say, Gorokokam Kianaga," which is something to the effect of, "I love you undressed, working girl, for frick's sakes, I love you undressed." Her mother's face, and my face, I was mortified. She lay on the floor, dying. Her mother started screaming at her and chasing her around. That's the last time I asked her how to say anything in Polish. Yep, all the time. I'm a white girl living in an Asian country. Nobody expected me to be fluent in Chinese, so I heard people talking about me quite a bit. I usually don't bother responding unless they say something insulting about my family. My favorite thing, however, is not responding in Chinese, but in English. For example, when a shop person says in Chinese, "She's probably a tourist, we can charge her $10 more," I'll say in English, "I'm not a tourist and I won't pay an extra $10 for this." Then I leave them wondering if I'm some sort of psychic. Okay, they probably don't actually think that. Somewhat related, I went to get some breakfast tacos, and while I was in line, one female employee asked another, "¿Te la limpias antes de venir?" I busted out laughing and their jaws literally dropped. She was asking, jokingly, if the other girl had washed her hoo-ha before coming into work. My wife is fluent in Japanese, and when she was 16 she lived in Japan as a student. But she's a New England wasp with blonde hair, blue eyes, and busty, so the expectation among the locals was that she only spoke American. And the Japanese talked all kinds of crap about her in front of her, businessmen talking about her chest, a grandmother on the subway talking about how American women need to cross their legs when they sit because of the smell. Finally, she gets so fed up with this, she asks a kid in her school how to say "frick you" in Japanese. The kid replies, "We don't really have words for that." My wife insists, surely they must have something, and the kid says, "Okay, say this." Now my wife, armed, waits for the right moment. She was on the train, a businessman said something about her, and she turned and said those words. The businessman immediately blanches and gets off at the next stop. My wife thinks this is amazing and starts using it everywhere. Finally, her homestay sister is with her. My wife uses the phrase on some kid calling her gaijin, and her homestay sister freaks out. "Do you know what you just said?" "Yes, I said frick you to that kid." "No," says her homestay sister. "You just told that kid you were going to commit the unspeakable act on him." In short, 16-year-old girl threatens to unspeakable act most of Tokyo. Oh boy, that's one of those "I have to move" faux pas that makes you stay in bed for the better part of a week. Still, I'll bet none of those people who insulted her saw it coming, and it probably made some of them pause before talking crap about foreigners again. Also, the narrator would like to apologize for his pronunciation on all of the languages in the video. I don't have time to study all of these. Not only have I done this, I've actually busted employees for policy violations this way too. So much yes. I'm a man with very long hair. One evening at Dell HQ, the Spanish-only speaking janitors were behind me waiting for the elevator, and one of them says, "She sure has a nice butt and beautiful hair." They turned red when I turned around to show them my long, elegant beard. I said, "Gracias," in a cute, girly voice. My husband and I, he speaks French and I speak Spanish, and we both speak English, were vacationing in France, and while visiting this castle town some years back, we stopped for lunch. The waiter thought we were Americans and decided to call me a working girl in French when we complained that we had been waiting for 1.5 hours for our food to come out, and said we were going to leave and to please give us the check for what we'd consumed. I think the waiter was fired that same day when my husband gave the restaurant manager a piece of his mind in French. I worked for the World HQ of a company, and we were imposing a project on the affiliate in the Netherlands. There were a bunch of English-speaking people, mostly US, UK, and Canada. HQ people worked with an equal number of Dutch people who didn't really want us there. It's very easy to pick up basic words, especially names when you keep hearing them. Someone peeked into the room I was in and asked in Dutch where to find someone. I didn't even notice it was in Dutch, I just answered in English and he left. The 2 Dutch women in the room looked at me horrified, and one stammered and asked how much Dutch I'd picked up. Without missing a beat, the other English speaker in the room replied in a warning tone, "Much more than you realize." Of course, we never had any idea what they were saying when they were talking about us, but those ladies were really nice to us for the next week, and a lot of people quit speaking Dutch around us after that. My father is rather rotund, and at one point we were in a store in Italy while on holiday. Next to the store was a mother with a rather bratty child, and in an attempt to quiet her, the mother somewhat subtly pointed at my father and said, "Manga bimbi," eats children. Sadly, our Italian was not good enough to come up with a comeback quickly enough. I still like to call my father a child eater though. Oh my god, yes, I have so many. I'm half white, half Filipino, but I look like a skinhead with a slight tan. Nobody would ever believe I spoke Tagalog, so I get a lot of these. Here's a few of my favorites. I'm a bit heavy-set and I was at a friend's wedding, which was predominantly Filipino. Anyways, I was in line at the dessert buffet and 2 of the people I was sitting with asked me to go get them food as well. So I had 3 plates in my hand as I was waiting to get served, and 2 Filipino ladies behind me said in Tagalog, "Look at this fat guy, he's gonna eat everything before we get there." I chuckled and shook my head. I didn't bother confronting them since I have a bunch of aunties that would probably do the same thing. I was helping a Filipino co-worker pick up some furniture she brought from a patio furniture place. Since I owned a truck, she asked if I could help her. During this time, everyone had Nextels, and you could do that direct connect thing that made the phones act like walkie-talkies. So she direct connects her husband, telling her we're on our way. He replies back in Tagalog, "Don't let your coworker in the house, he might steal something." Now, this being on the speakerphone, I heard the whole thing, and she knew I spoke Tagalog and understood. Her face turned bright red and she started yelling at her husband, "You stupid idiot, he speaks Tagalog." When we got to the house, he acted like nothing had happened, even invites me in for a beer. I politely said no thanks and helped my coworker unload the truck. She kept apologizing, she was so embarrassed. I was at Disneyland one time when we were on Main Street standing in a crowd waiting for the parade to go by. There was a section roped off for handicapped people. I noticed there was a Filipino family in front of us with a middle-aged man in a wheelchair taking up the front row. As the parade started, the man in the wheelchair got up and walked forward to get a better view. One of the older women started yelling at him in Tagalog and told him to sit back down or he'd blow their cover. Apparently, they got the wheelchair so they could cut in line and get special treatment. What's the best "welcome to the real world" moment that hit a spoilt rich kid? I grew up with rich kids and still keep in touch with a few of them. One guy's father owned the most prestigious law firm in town. He said his life changed the moment he called his father from jail the second time it happened. His father said, "Well, sorry to hear you got arrested, good luck," and then hung up. He said getting locked back into his cell was the singular moment that completely turned his life around. I knew this rich kid from high school that went off to college and partied every single night. His parents found out that he was basically failing all of his classes, so they secretly drove up early one Saturday morning with a spare set of keys to the car they'd bought him and just drove off with the car. Somewhat distant relatives spent all of his university years and 20s partying hard with the $100 to $120K allowance his rich company-owning father gave him each year. He'd travel the world each year going to Bali, Thailand, Europe, every year Oktoberfest, just rampaging. And at 32 or so, he decided to settle an upscale ski resort area of the US and open a business with his hot gold digger fiancée. When he went to transfer his money to his US bank account, he noticed it only came to a few $1,000s. Angrily asked the bank worker why she hadn't transferred the entire amount, only to be told that that was the entire amount. His father had cut him off without saying anything, and he just hadn't noticed. Absolute flatline. Rich guy in our college dorm thought he was untouchable because his dad was some NFL player from the 90s and had not blown all of his money yet. He'd get freshman girls blackout drunk and then film himself doing the deed with them, and then show all of his buddies the next day or so. Well, one buddy was not as close as he thought and went to the residential advisor, who then went to the campus police and then the real police. It was a fun night watching the parking lot fill up with the bored cops on duty that night and haul his butt out of the dorms while they went and gathered his evidence. Never saw him after that night. This took place near the end of the week, Thursday or Friday, because I remember going to class on Monday and his dorm was empty and being cleaned out by the housekeeping staff. Yuck. Well deserved. Look, say what you will about most people born with silver spoons in their butts, most of them don't seem to do this. But don't worry, there's plenty of other things to be annoyed about them for. That one Instagram model who got caught on video talking crap to a security guard at VidCon, not only did the guard stand his ground and not let him in because he wasn't famous enough to be given a pass and too rich to just buy one, but once the internet saw the video, the guard ended up having more followers than the kid. My classmate in college failed his course, partied for a year with daddy's money, never studied, ever. The thing is, inheriting his father's construction company, 2 quarries, a fleet of trucks and equipment, depended on him manning up and passing the class. All he had to do was learn the basics of mechanical diagnostic and repair and be set for life. I had a roommate my freshman year of college that came from an incredibly rich oil family from the Middle East. I remember him having the hardest time adjusting to not having someone else prepare him food. I remember waking up one morning and going to the kitchen and seeing him try to eat eggs and toast he had just prepared himself. He asked me how I normally prepare fried eggs because his tasted really crunchy. Turns out he'd just cracked the egg whole into the pan and prepared it shell and all. I couldn't stop laughing, but I felt really bad for the guy. He was actually a pretty good dude. It was an interesting semester helping him learn how to live providing for himself. I knew a guy in high school who bragged that he didn't have to pay attention in school because, get this, His grandfather was vice president of the corporation that supplied the cardboard for cereal boxes for General Mills. Real gravy train, you know. Last I checked, I've since deleted Facebook, he was still working at Best Buy 5 years after high school. It was the same job he'd had in high school too. My best moment was when I got hired by a pair of Woodside, California parents to transition their horrible 18-year-old into the realities of real life, something that evaded both of them. My first action was to take away his platinum limitless credit cards. He threw a tantrum that lasted several days. "Where am I going to get the money?" "Well, you get a job. My parents will fire you." They didn't. When he realized that boundaries and budgets had been set in stone and that he not only had to pay the bills, the rent, but taxes too, he headed straight to college to wait out the next 4 years. He's still a complete jerk, but at least he has a job and an education now. Okay, how does one get into your line of work? That sounds really fun. I was the nanny while working through my PDD, so I came to it indirectly. There's a whole workforce of people who do this. It's word of mouth and next door. My favorite moment had to be on the BBC when Prince Andrew got the crap kicked out of him for an hour about his sordid deeds. Well deserved, but if it was a really just world, he'd be in prison. One of my college roommates told his parents the trip we were planning, that they were paying for, was $400 more expensive than it was so that he could buy a really nice substance-smoking apparatus. In addition, they basically paid for everything he wanted. He had their credit card and ordered food on it at least once daily. He'd make $50 purchases off the card all the time. Long story short, they found out he lied about the cost of the trip. For whatever reason, they still paid and let him go, but after the trip, he just couldn't use their card anymore. This guy acted like he lived the hardest life of all time after that, but eventually sucked it up. He actually acts way less entitled now. It ended up having a lasting positive effect on him, even though he wouldn't admit it. While working in a casino here in Las Vegas, a herd of girls came up to my window, and one proceeded to tell me about her great birthday party itinerary that her dad had paid for her 18th birthday, with no adult in the party, just a bunch of teenage girls out in Vegas, where none of them could do anything because none of them were 21. I couldn't even check them into their reservation. They started yelling and screaming at me, and I calmly called security. And security told them that they could either go play in the arcade or leave and try to find a hotel off the strip that will take them in without being 21. Their anger turned to tears and the security guard was unmoved. Was at a Starbucks and this lady apparently thought that people gave her parents free drinks and such for her after all this time. Like the cashier told her the total and she said, "Wait, I don't get it for free?" She never realized her parents swiping their cards all those years was paying for her things, I guess. A favorite family story is when my uncle called him from the police station on a Friday night. He was in high school at the time and got caught drinking. My grandfather answered the phone and simply asked, "What did you do?" And my uncle responds, "Nothing. Great, tell him to let you go," and hangs up the phone and goes back to sleep. Both my uncle and the police were stunned, but it being the weekend, my uncle ended up having to get transferred to the county jail until Monday morning. The police from the jail called my grandfather on Monday morning and said, "You've got to pick the poor kid up." His time in jail wasn't particularly traumatic, but it taught him a pretty valuable lesson in how principled his grandfather was. Had he been honest and just admitted what he did, he wouldn't have been in that situation. That's our second story showing us that although people who are born into money are as often as not massive entitled idiots, those who actually go from rags to riches aren't necessarily so. It's too bad there's so little room to do so these days. No joke here, back in high school in the 90s, this kid got a brand new Chevy Camaro. I had an old 80s Pontiac Phoenix that had the straight six. It was by far not a racing car, but this tool was just looking to brag at what he got compared to the busted cars we got. About 2 days later, while we were waiting at the stoplight, this idiot tries to race us. I'm in my car and I pull up with my friends. He starts revving it real loud and tries to do a burnout. Mind you, the light was red and the roads were not wet. So he managed to get a tiny burnout going, some smoke and whatnot, when his tires catch traction and he goes barreling into the intersection and smashed the car of the wife of one of the very few cops in my tiny town. Needless to say, that didn't work out for him very well. A kid from my high school came from a well-known family that was very involved in politics. He slacked off in school and was mostly a condescending butthead for years. After graduation, he didn't really do anything, but eventually decided to run for office as he had the same name as his father. He won easily because people didn't realize it was the kid. As a state rep, he posted on Facebook about enjoying his women battered rather than plain, and asking to join the Black Caucus because he liked hip-hop. He also dropped a loaded piece on the floor in the middle of a session after fighting for the right to carry a weapon in the state house as a responsible owner. He kept getting elected despite these issues because his family was well connected and he had a dedicated following from some political groups. After 6 years in office, he got busted for some pretty illicit and illegal dealings over the internet. When they arrested him for it, they also discovered he'd been dealing substances. The worst part is that his family is actually super nice and genuinely made the community a better place, but now they have to deal with all the issues from him. He was an apple that fell very far from the tree. Middle school. A classmate was on the phone when most of us didn't even have cell phones, screaming at her stepdad, "Patrick, I need the $500. I need to buy new jeans." She did not get the $500, but she did later get to be a teen mom, so that was cool. When I was a teenager, my sister and I saw through our windows that there were two guys getting into her car. We ran downstairs as fast as possible and caught them in the act. One managed to run away, but the other one froze and didn't run. He couldn't have been much older than me. My sister called the cops and the guy kept looking at us and trying to figure out a way to escape. My sister said, "Run if you want, my brother will catch you." The cops came and so did his parents. His mum drove a frickin' amazing car and the lady looked furious and sad. She was dressed real nice and she looked like she was pretty successful. As soon as she got out, she began yelling, "Why? We give you everything. You have everything. Why would you try and steal? Don't we give you enough?" The kid just seemed to shrink and get smaller. I don't get it, frickin' butthole. I hope he turned his life around and began to be around better people. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Freshman year of college, the guy across the hall from me was a spoiled rich kid from a big southern city. Old money clearly coming out of his butt. A couple of weeks into the second semester, he and a buddy found a checkbook on the sidewalk. Stupid idiots decided to write themselves a check and cash it in the bank that the account was in. The teller immediately called the cops and they both got arrested. We talked the night he got arrested and he laughed and said his dad would take care of it and everything would be fine. That weekend, we met his dad as they moved everything out of the dorms since his dumb butt got expelled. I guess Daddy didn't take care of it. Nothing too serious, but I taught at an international school in Africa and we'd take the high school students camping one week out of the year. Most of these kids were not used to camping at all and have never taken public transport in their lives. They had full-time drivers bring them to school and pick them up. Some of them are from very wealthy and politically connected families. Having them set up tents and get dirty, not be able to shower every day and sleep on hard ground was pretty new to them. Some of them actually love it, but others are sad, pathetic wretches the entire week. Ah, camping, the great equalizer. I went to a very rich, predominantly white Catholic high school. One moment I do remember was the wind absolutely being taken out of a girl's sails when I explained to her why our school dominated the area's skiing, golf, and equestrian competitions, but never anything else. For a lot of kids in that school, the moment they learned they were rich was the moment they learned that most girls don't have their own horses growing up. A kid I knew won a cool $1 million off a scratch ticket when he was 19. He acted like a big shot, arrogantly buying rounds of drinks for entire bars, didn't do crap for 20 years. Then he got the last check. Alcoholic, no savings, no assets, and no skills. He's now in and out of hospitals for alcohol poisoning and mental breakdowns. He lost his paper hat job, his girlfriend, everything. There you go. Maybe it isn't explicitly being born into money that makes you a sack of crap. Maybe it's just getting more money than you know what to do with when you're young and dumb. If I had $1 million when I was 19, I actually think my life might have gone pretty similarly, and I'd be worse off now. For a couple of years in high school, I went to the super expensive American private school in Switzerland. The company my dad worked for paid for almost all of the tuition, so it was an amazing opportunity for me. Most of the kids in the school were either State Department or from American families living in Saudi. Saudi provided expat kids with school up until 10th grade, so you had to go to school abroad to finish high school. There were, however, a few Saudi kids that were there, mostly so that they'd be able to speak flawless English to help out with their future careers. One of these kids, who I'll call the Prince, was somewhere in the line of Saudi succession, but honestly he was like 1,455th in line for the throne. Not a real contender for king, but his family was rich. Like rich in a way that most of us can't even imagine. The school had some rules, like you couldn't have a car as a student, even if you were old enough to get a license in Switzerland. This rule was a real buzzkill for the prince, but he made it through the year somehow. Over the summer after his junior year, he drove back to the school from Geneva in his Lamborghini, probably just because he could do it outside the school year. On his way up the mountain, the road is like an endless series of hairpin turns, he managed to flip his Lambo into a vineyard while trying to navigate one of those hairpin turns. I'm guessing a Lambo has a lot of power and he took it too hard. His parents, furious at what he had done, decided to punish him by replacing his Lamborghini with a Porsche. The prince was so angry. He complained about it bitterly when the school year started up again. The rest of us kind of just looked at each other in amazement. Same planet, different worlds, I guess. Local rich kid had his SUV in a no parking area at the club. Tow truck shows up to tow it away and the kid goes ballistic. "Do you know who my father is?" etc. to the tow truck driver. After a minute or two of this, the passenger gets out of the tow truck and is a full patch Hell's Angel. The biker politely tells him it doesn't matter who he thinks his family is, and the SUV is towed away. I knew a kid in high school whose parents were loaded. When he got his driver's license, they bought him a $70,000 Mercedes. Within a month or two, he had totaled the car while driving drunk. Parents pulled strings to get him off the full weight of the DUI. Oh, and they bought him another $70K Mercedes. He took too many substances and too much booze when he was 23. He's no longer alive now. I knew one who apparently couldn't fathom how people live on a budget. We used to hang out a lot at her insistence, but she liked to eat at expensive places, whereas I'd have no issue with my meals coming from somewhere cheaper. However, she kept pouting and insisting that I stay. I said I couldn't unless she wanted to spot me. She didn't. I then walked her through the math and showed her the cost of my meals with her. Every day totaled my entire wage for the month. She didn't stop pouting, but from then on, I could eat by myself in peace. You know, I'm trying to be a better man and not take delight in anyone's misfortune, but a rich kid in my high school totaled his pickup truck. He got angry when parents wouldn't replace it, so he purposefully crashed his twin brother's pickup truck, because if he couldn't have one, neither could the brother. Not to mention all the legal stuff that I'm sure was fallout from doing that. Anyway, that kid disappeared. I assumed he went to jail or something like that. Found out recently that no, he didn't actually. His parents literally disowned him, like with the paperwork and everything, and sent him on his way to fend for himself. And I have no idea how that turned out. A guy from my robotics group had his entire life handed to him. His dad was stupid rich because his dad bought shares in an oil field that turned out to have 40 times the expected yield, making his $100,000 investment become around $3 million, and then he dumped that into real estate rentals. He decided it would be fun to do a school trip in Philly acting rich as all heck. He drove his lifted, modded SUV to a school we were doing a robotics event at in North Philly, talking to younger kids about how it's fun and their school has started offering it, and then we were going to the Franklin Institute from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., then a Phantoms hockey game. Well, 9:30 rolls around and we leave the school to see our bus driver talking to the cops. 5 kids drove themselves down, and guess which car was stolen? His $90K monstrosity was missing, and after 2 months, and all that was ever recovered was his stereo from a pawn shop and his laptop. The best frickin' part? He didn't have insurance on it yet because he can just buy the other person's car if there's an accident. Anyway, I'd win the legal fight. His dad flipped out over it and cut his allowance down to $200 a month and forced him to drive a beater until he saved up his own money. That brat's punishment is more than I could have ever wanted as an upper-middle-class kid. Growing up around a well-to-do old area, the thing is you wouldn't know it. Like most of our neighbors were comfortably off because we didn't drive fancy 40K cars or whatever. Yeah, the narrator had an allowance as a young adult, and not a bad one either. It was still, and I can't stress this enough, a very small fraction of what this guy was getting when his parents were done with his crap. A rich, scummy injury lawyer's kid was in my class in high school. Goes to college, a mid-sized school in the Midwest, and gets plastered drunk. Parents bought him and his friends alcohol since freshman year, so nothing new there, and the RA said he has to write him up for alcohol in the dorms. The guy then punches 2 RAs and then gets the cops called on him and knocks a cop's tooth out as well. Long story short, his parents have to drive back 6 to 7 hours after 1 day to get him, and he's not even allowed to leave the state until his hearing. The last I heard, he's working at a fast food restaurant. In a country with a high alcohol taxation, rich kids enter the pub, like 10 to 12 of them. They throw the card at the bartender demanding shots. What would he like? Whatever, dad's paying. The bartender pours double Johnny Walker Blues for all the brats and some randoms that they've treated. The brat with the card had tears in his eyes when the tab came in. My dad's gonna kill me. I did enjoy that free whiskey, though. Here's a switch. Highly successful local doctor and politician expects his son to attend medical school and become a doctor. The son opts out, gets a job with a new company called Costco pumping gas. He's been with that company ever since, just his regular pay raises and bonus checks give him a good life. He just didn't want the high-stress life that his dad had. If I was sure I'd inherit most of my dad's wealth, I'd do that too. Work at Costco just to socialize and pass the time, and the earnings for personal spending and whatnot. Just spend wisely and not be a jerk, and then I would have lived comfortably after that. This isn't the best, as it's pretty sad and frankly undeserved, but a good example of the question asked. I went to a very expensive private elementary school. A friend of mine grew up wealthy. Her father was a surgeon and mother a stay-at-home wife. They were very controlling of her and, quite honestly, a bit scary. They sheltered her to the extreme, and she frequently repeated insane things that they'd said verbatim because that was all she knew. If she was told to clean her room but left an item out upon her parents' inspection, they'd throw the item out no matter what it was. Once it was something very sentimental to her. I can't remember exactly what, and when she told me and I expressed sympathy, she said something like, "Oh no, it's okay, it's my fault. If I told my children to clean their rooms but they didn't and had their friends come over, their friends would go home and tell their parents about how much of a slob my family is, and that can't happen." This was her concern as a 10-year-old. When it came time for college, they sent her to an expensive, hard-to-get-into school and told her that her sole purpose there was to find a husband, specifically a doctor or an engineer, to keep her as a stay-at-home wife. She flat out told me this was her only purpose, which broke my heart because she's a smart person who was able to get into said school to begin with, and her parents should have been encouraging different goals for her. Well, she found a boyfriend, but at the end of her 4 years of undergrad, he turned out to be a cheating, narcissistic D-bag. The narcissistic D-bag part was obvious to me from the get-go, but she had no idea what a healthy relationship looked like. However, the cheating was obvious enough to be a deal-breaker. So instead of going straight to marriage, which disappointed her parents and they kicked her out of the house, she suddenly had to become solely independent, found a job and an apartment, and is doing well for herself. She's a totally different person now and has really come a long way. Friends and family of Karens, what's it like? I divorced Karen. I haven't had to see a manager since. Thank you. But it is my favorite when family members or boyfriends swing by later to tell me they're sorry for Karen's behavior and that I'm actually doing a great job. Why are we even asking this question? None of them are actually here. They're on shared Facebook accounts named Karen and Dave Smith. My mum is a literal Karen, as in it's in her name, but she's like a bizarro Karen. She'll constantly ask to speak with managers and supervisors and bosses, but when said managers arrive, she unloads about the employees helping her out being fantastic, hardworking, and friendly. And then she'll spend 20 minutes trying to figure out if she and the manager know someone in common. 9 times out of 10, they do. As a kid, it would embarrass me, and as an adult, it's one of my favorite things about her. She makes people feel good about the work they do, and it's really special to watch how wonderful she makes people feel. Plus, she's got long, gorgeous silver hair. My sister is also a Karen. She spent her life working with the disabled and is currently an essential worker. It is the absolute best. I love my wife. I didn't write that. My sister is a Karen. Everyone feels so sorry for her husband. Everything is his fault. He's treated like a slave. She only addresses him by yelling. She constantly insults him. We have no idea why he hasn't divorced her or flipped out and attacked her. We've all told her to cool it, and her response is that he's just so dumb. I could go on, but my sister is really a horrible person. You know, I don't think there'll be any actual Karen husbands writing in here. They're probably all on Facebook. And I don't think they have profiles, at least ones under their own names. I think they're only on Facebook in their partner's pictures. Also, as the narrator has done in the past, he'd like to clarify that this story grouping is open for both female Karens and their male counterparts, the Kens. I married someone with a Karen for a sister. Sister-in-law is the frickin' worst. I hate more than anything going out to dinner with her, listening to her order food and talk to servers. Holidays are also terrible. She sends out long lists of expected gifts. She celebrates every holiday and birthday specifically for presents, even when it's not appropriate. The funny thing is, one time I was away from the dinner table when the bill came, and my sister-in-law waited for me to return to pay the bill by actually handing it to me. She didn't give it to her sibling or my partner or pay her half, but expressly handed it to me to pay. By the way, her husband is an idiot and they're a match made in heaven. And I'm sorry to disappoint everyone, but yes, I did pay. There are many reasons as to why, but the biggest one is that it got me out of the restaurant faster. Also, it helps me control the tip. Another time we went to a family brunch where the bill was split. Karen's sister-in-law waited to see what other people tipped so she could lower the overall tip percentage for the waitress to what sister-in-law thought was deserving. We didn't know this until afterwards, when she bragged about it later, so no one even knew to stop her. And she's invited to these family meals because she has 2 children that we actually want a relationship with. So she has that emotional blackmail card. I'm not married to one, but my mom was a major Karen back when I was growing up. "Mom, can we just go?" was my favorite expression, then the apologetic nod as we left the store. I really relate to this. All throughout my childhood it happened. I remember being an embarrassed 11-year-old walking around apologizing for my mom's behavior in stores and restaurants, and it sucked. It's supposed to be the other way around. "Damn it, Mom, stop being a little bag of crap, it's my turn." Precisely. Frick you, Mum. Stop making racially channeled attacks on the minimum wage waiter. I want to unscrew the lid on all the salts and take a massive crap in my pants because I'm not allowed ice cream for a main course. Instead, I have to go, "I'm really sorry about Mom. She's been unwell and doesn't mean it. I'm so sorry." I mean, it's funny now, but actually kinda sad in my memory. That stuff leaves marks under the surface. I had to be a full-time carer and adult at 11. I sometimes feel like I didn't get to be a kid for long enough. I know a couple with a Karen. She blamed him for everything. The husband was, in our opinion, something of a saint. Once she broke a glass in the kitchen, came back and sat down at the table and said, "That was your fault." We all just stared at her. She looked sheepish and said, "I knew that one probably wouldn't work." They're divorced now. I guess even saintliness has its limits. My husband's ex is a Karen. She's a classic narcissist. When one of our feral hens started acting aggressive towards other hens, my stepson named her Karen. Honestly, she's perfect. She makes me so happy. Help me! My mum is a Karen, literally overreacts to everything. Whenever something doesn't go her way, you guessed it, gotta speak to the manager or whoever's in charge. Sometimes it's really embarrassing to go out in public with her because she'll just yell at the service workers for the smallest of things. Also, she does have a bob cut. My mom was a Karen for a while. She literally didn't realize it until my brother and I started calling her out on it when we were early teens because we were embarrassed. She made genuine efforts to change, and a few years later, she's the sweetest woman you've ever met. I'm just saying there's hope. My aunt is a Karen, and my uncle is this soft-spoken giant. He never stands up to her in any way, except once. It was at their daughter's wedding. She was about to interrupt the ceremony to close a window because she was chilly. Everyone sitting close could hear her whisper, "I'm gonna do it, but I don't want to be a jerk." My uncle, in a calm, quiet tone, says quickly, "Why stop now?" Almost as if his filter just missed this one. I swear I could hear my dad snort 2 rows back trying to hold in his laughter. Karen was not happy. I taught my nephews, ages 9 and 11, about Karens last year when they stayed with us for a week after school let out. After describing traits and observing them in the wild, they asked somewhere around day 2, Is our mom a Karen? My reply were, "Your words, not mine." It's a weird clash between the need to be respectful and not undermine someone as a parent, and to call out bad behavior when you see it. I don't know if this was a good thing to do, but at least the kid might resolve to not grow up to exhibit some of these behaviors. My mum can be difficult sometimes, but isn't a Karen. When my sister and I were in our mid-20s, my mum had to start caring for our grandma. After a particularly stressful Saturday afternoon at my grandma's home, we were all carpooling back to my mum's place, and she said to my sister and I, "If I ever start acting like grandma, you'd better tell me." My sister and I sat there in complete silence. After a couple of beats, she yelled, "I do not act like my mother!" It made my sister and I laugh until we cried, mostly because, yes, she did and does act like her mother. My mum's a Karen. She's self-aware that she is a Karen. My siblings and I send her memes about it. When my stepdad divorced her last summer, we were all amazed he lasted 17 years, to be honest. None of us like going out with her. It's terrible. And my husband just straight up tells her, "No, you aren't talking to the manager when we go in a place." I'll tell you guys a story my stepfather told us. They're farmers and they own a small beef and bee farm. They have a store they go to for bee supplies. The owner called my stepdad and asked him to please be the one to pick up their stuff because his staff was tired of dealing with my mum. He's the only one who went to the store for the next 5 years. My close friend's parents are jerks, but she's really sweet. She learned bad behavior from parents, so she'd be super rude when we went out if she didn't get her way, but never to her friends. I told her about it and she was sort of receptive but didn't really get it. So I started pointing it out at restaurants. "Mary, that was super rude, what the frick, dude?" "Dude, Mary, chill!" Stuff like that. Probably really annoying, but I made my point. She very quickly realized she was being a jerk and she changed. If someone is a good person but they're being a jerk, it helps to have a chat first. Maybe they just don't realize it. My mum is a Karen. She thinks the world is supposed to cater to her, serve her, and everyone else is wrong. Once we went to Carl's Jr. and she ordered 4 burgers for the 4 of us. She pulls one out of the bag while the guy is getting our drinks and she hides the burger. She complains that he forgot a burger. She pulls them out one by one and counts it out in front of him. It's obviously missing because she hid it, and he's swearing up and down that he put them all in the bag. I'm stunned, speechless, and it happened so fast. She got a free burger and laughed as we drove off. I was just staring at her and she opened it up and ate it on the drive home. She ate her actual burger like the 5th one never existed. I can't even explain how she is when she's in the hospital. She treats it like it should be a luxury stay in a hotel. Married to one. She doesn't get why people think Karens complain so much. It's annoying for her and she'd like to talk to someone about this. 4 years of a toxic relationship, luckily unmarried. I broke up with her on Monday, again. We're kind of screwed financially because of this lockdown, so we're just feeling things out for a month before we decide for sure. This is a cycle on repeat. I constantly have to cut her off and speak over her because of the way she treats people. Waiters, sale assistants, gym staff, neighbors, landlords, randoms we meet in bars. We were both waiters at the beginning of our relationship, so she's worked in the industry, but she still lacks empathy. She blames the waiter if something is out of stock. My second major issue is that we're now both English second language teachers. She teaches kindergarten while I teach high school. Now that we're both working from home, I hear how she speaks to her students, and it's really opened up another aspect of her personality that I just don't like. She'll berate a student for not understanding instead of evaluating her ability to explain. Shouting at 3-year-olds in their second language just doesn't fly with me. A lot of her behavior stems from a self-defense mechanism due to insecurity, but that's not an excuse. She doesn't realize how mean she is to people, including myself. I'm a people pleaser that would rather sacrifice my own comfort than someone else's, and she expects me to be a jerk to people because I'm a big guy with tattoos. I don't exactly look soft. It's toxic as heck. Please help. Oh, and the hardest part about this breakup? Our bedroom life is so good it rivals most adult films, easily. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My mum is absolutely one. I spend most of my time with her in public apologizing to people after she's walked away. The one and only time it comes in handy is when I've bought cars and had her come in during the price negotiation phase. She's knocked off thousands purely due to how unpleasant she is and how much people want her to just get the heck out the door. Please help me, everyone. I'm sorry, you'll need to speak to the manager. I'd say the 2 biggest categories we have in the answers that we've received here are, first, people venting about their mothers whilst also trying not to be too mean, and then these hilarious joke hostage messages. At least I hope they're jokes. Otherwise, my god, you poor souls. Dated a male Karen for 8 years. He was a semi-successful business owner who was twice my age, and I was young and dumb, for lack of a better word. The gist of our relationship was him trying to take over every part of my life. For instance, he'd order for me at restaurants and would dissuade me if I wanted to try something new. If I had a problem with something, it would be brushed off, but if he had a problem, then, you guessed it, he had to talk to a manager. Not knowing any better, I just thought he was very particular, and even started copying some of his tendencies, like speaking up when I felt like I wasn't getting the right service when I was out on my own. I realized who he was when we were flying back from Vegas and our luggage was heavier than when we flew in. Obviously, we'd bought extra things which made up for the weight difference, so as he demanded to know an explanation from the check-in clerk as to why, if it was the same luggage, it would weigh more, I innocently answered that it must have been the extra shoes and clothes. He was quiet and paid up. Later, he told me not to do that again, as he knew the reason why the luggage was heavier. He was just trying to get away with not paying. At that moment, a light bulb went off in my head. This man, who'd spent $1,500 on an exotic dancer for his friends, was making an already stressful job more stressful for the clerk in order to avoid paying $60. We broke up soon after, and I checked myself on the Karen tendencies that he had rubbed off on me. My ex-wife is a Karen in every sense but name. It was always so embarrassing. She was incapable of treating anyone like a human for the most trivial of occurrences. It was hell for me as a person that's pretty forgiving and doesn't seek out confrontation. So in one word, it was hell. Also, she's very codependent and jumps from relationship to relationship these days. I'm not surprised. My life has been a living heck. The number of times I've had to intervene to save the life of a customer service rep over nickels is insane. I've asked for a divorce now, just a couple of weeks ago. Guess how that went over? Stay strong, lawyer up, bury gold in a place where only you know where it is. Prepare for war. But good on you. Bury your gold in 4 different locations around Pawnee. My mum is a Karen. Not fun. I think she was part of the reason the girl I loved left, because whenever she was around, my mum behaved much better and put on a nice face. We argued frequently about my relationship with my mum. Hurts a lot. Don't think that I can fully let this one go. Look, I love my mum very much, and she's generally a very nice person. I've spent a good while trying to put it to words accurately, but it's difficult. Everything is very minor and very subtle, but it's constant all the time. It's not what she does, it's how she does it sort of thing. She doesn't try to hide her behavior when in public, she just tries to put her best face forward when around others like everyone else does. I don't know if she's aware of what she does when at home because it's so minor and subtle, but I have a difficult time believing that since it's constant and other reasons. For those concerned for me in some way, thank you, it means a lot. Only one of my friends knows the specifics of my relationship with my mum, so it's nice to receive support. To relieve some of your worries, she doesn't control my life or my actions. The pain she causes is dwarfed greatly by everything she has done for me. Without her, I wouldn't have made it to where I am today, and I'm extremely thankful and lucky to have her in my life despite the pain. I don't think I'll cut her out of my life. Less frequent contact helps, but she's not so great a terror that no contact is ever needed. I look forward to seeing her spoil my grandchildren, and I know she'll trust me to raise them and not try to take over and do it herself. I divorced an awful Karen who was convicted of domestic violence. That's a misdemeanor, folks. She got half of everything. Totally worth it. My life before was a nightmare, and escape was priceless. I got engaged to one. She was raised as a princess by her military father. However, she's super down to earth, but God forbid you work in the service industry and mess something up. She's worked at IHOP during college, so it humbled her compared to the rest of her family. She just writes reviews now, good or bad, and emails corporate to complain. If something is wrong with my food, she refuses me to sit there and eat it. Which I hate, but I have gotten her better about it, I believe. So maybe she's just a recovering Karen at this point? My mother is a Karen. If something minor inconveniences her, she blows it up into a huge deal, constantly complains, belittles me, and has a slight superiority complex. Oh my god, I read the title as Koreans, and I was thoroughly confused and amused by these stories. I'll see myself out. I'm not married to a Karen, but someone in my family decided to get hitched to one, and let me say, it's frickin' hell. I don't go to any social event if Karen will be there. It keeps the peace in my family, to be honest. Nor do I go alone with Karen. She's a nightmare to everyone in her path, from car guards to cashiers, even her friends. No one can be better than her or smarter than her, and she's just frickin' exhausting. The worst part is, her kids are becoming just like her. People who are married to Karens are the guy equivalent of Karens, or they're aloof goofs unaware that their Karen is a Karen. You won't get a real answer from them. Well, there's an awful lot of fiction going on here then, although I guess the majority of the stories are from family rather than spouses, so maybe your Ken theory holds some water. Was married to a male Karen, everything, and I mean everything, could set him off. We were at a local tap room and his iPhone automatically connected to the Wi-Fi. Keep in mind he had full bars on our cell service. The Wi-Fi was being wonky and wasn't working. The manager, super nice guy, comes over and asks how we're doing while he washes some glasses in the dish pit on the other side of the bar. The following conversation ensues. Keep in mind my husband is super irritated at this made-up problem because our cell service is working just fine and he could just turn off the Wi-Fi. Your Wi-Fi is frickin' trash. Yeah, sorry, we recently upgraded our internet and they're sending us a new modem. It's supposed to be here this week. If you say you have Wi-Fi, you should make sure it actually works. I know, I'm sorry. I'd be happy to restart the modem to see if that helps. My husband then ignores him and continues to talk under his breath about a made-up issue. This was my life for almost 5 years. The sense of entitlement was frustrating enough in public, but more so at home. I'd apologized to more servers, retail workers, neighbors, and random people in public for him in 5 years than the rest of my life outside of him. You know what? Now that I'm talking about it, maybe he's not so much a male Karen, he's more like a, piece of crap. Not married to one, but my mum is a Karen whose name actually is Karen. Simply put, I haven't seen her in over a year because I couldn't take it anymore. Living with her was just an exhausting nightmare. Karen's world revolves around Karen. Nobody else's issues matter. If you tell her that you had a bad day, she'll give you 20 reasons why her day was worse. You worked 60 hours this week? Well, when she was your age, she'd work 80. You were in the hospital after having major surgery? She has a pinched nerve in her arm, which is somehow worse. Oh, your boyfriend cheated on you? She couldn't even begin to tell you about all the heartbreak she's experienced in her life. She complains left and right about everything and anything. If you're taking a week break after just getting back from college, she'll ask why you haven't gotten a job yet and claim that you're lazy. If you go out to eat at a restaurant, the food is always too cold or too hot or too salty. You can only ever go to the places she wants to go because everything else is garbage. My entire graduation dinner, she complained about how cold the food was. She thrives in getting attention and constantly seeks it, but she has very few actual friends. Facebook is her lifeblood and she's always looking to start something on there. She's the queen of sharing uninformed, misguided, conservative propaganda, which always starts fights in her comments. Also, if a tragedy happens in the family, like the passing of my teenage cousin, she'll make a big scene on Facebook and expect condolences from anyone and everyone, and makes notes of the people who don't give her what she wants. And don't get me started with the blatant racism. I've heard everything from, watch out for the black people on the subway, they'll try to take your purse, to, it should be illegal for those Muslims to cover their faces. You should be able to see someone's face. One of my best friends is black and she once told me, he's one of the good ones, they should all be like him. And minor, but the house always has to be spotless. You have a shirt on your bedroom floor? Pick it up. You kids are all slobs. We have people coming over. No, we don't, and even if we do, why would they be in my bedroom? Her house is her house, and she'll let you know. Any object she spent money on doesn't belong to you, it belongs to her. She also spends way too much money on home decor like oriental rugs, furniture, and then complains about how she has no money. In short, my mother is a Karen who's actually named Karen. Living with her is a nightmare. What's the nuttiest thing that HR discovered that ended a career? We had an employee who'd clock in at the time clock every day and then go home. They'd come back to clock out for lunch and back in after an hour, then they'd come back at the end of the day. It was impressive how long it took the manager to catch on. I had a cousin do that at Walmart for many months. It was almost impressive. There was someone who clocked in at Toys R Us every morning, then drove to their other job, coming back to clock out at 8 hours or so later. It was when Toys R Us are closing. No one caught on. So I used to work at a software company and we kept getting complaints about a nap room being cluttered and trash from the nearby break room being left around in the mornings, so we asked security to do some late evening walkbys to see what was going on. One evening they found a young Asian woman hiding in the nap room. She didn't work there and didn't speak English. It was super weird. It turns out one of the software engineers who worked in the building had purchased a mail-order bride. But here's the kicker. He was already married. So unable to bring his new mail-order bride home, he kept her at the office. I have no idea where she hid during the day, but at night she made a good use of our little nap room. Gotta feel bad for that poor woman. We had a very nice HR lady who absolutely spoiled one of the employees in a wholesome way. He was a young immigrant boy who desperately needed a job. He was about 15. She'd go out of her way to give him rides, encourage management to give him raises, and even made him homemade meals. She eventually found out he was stealing all of their customers' credit card info and running them dry. which is why we'd been receiving so many criminal reports regarding our company. Not only this, but he'd flat out steal their purses and wallets while they were visiting. I'm talking hundreds of thousands mysteriously missing from our customers in a matter of months. It absolutely broke our HR lady's heart when she had to fire him and report him to the police. He was immediately arrested for a large number of crimes and deported. Oh, well, this is just kind of heartbreaking in that it was the one good HR employee in the world who was going out of her way to help out this poor kid. Oh boy. We had like a little privacy room at the job I had. It was meant for personal things that didn't belong in the bathroom, like milk pumping or administering insulin. We had a very small white woman who showed no outward signs of being Muslim, no headscarves, she ate pork fried rice every day, drank at company events, but we can't really judge on that. But she said she needed to do her prayer 5 times a day, and during work hours she'd pray in the privacy room. I wasn't like HR or anything, but my cubicle was right there. Someone was trying to go in to pump, and the door stayed locked. The company was very gossipy, and I was right there, so I heard it all. After about an hour of waiting, they realized her computer had actually been inactive for over 2 hours. They opened the door and there was immediate yelling, and I'm like, what the frick? So everyone was gawking around. There was smack and paraphernalia all around, and she was nodded out in the privacy room, like sleeping. They still had to go through this legal process to fire her a few days later, and she still showed up during the days in between. At my old IT job, we were doing inventory of these barcode scanners that they use in the plant. They needed an update installed, and we figured we'd do inventory at the same time since we needed to round them all up anyway. Well, we only found about a third of what we were supposed to have. Something missing is to be expected, but not that much. Well, later I found a bunch in a coworker's desk drawers. I didn't think much of it at the time. I ran the updates and put them back. Still looking for them, I found most of our missing stock for sale on eBay when searching them by serial number. I brought this information to my boss. He tells me to close the door. You always know it's going to be a serious talk when they close the door. He tells me, "Now, you listen here. You didn't see anything if you know what's good for you." I was fired from that job the next month. I still don't actually know what was going on there, but in hindsight, a lot of stuff disappeared. I'd install a bunch of monitors, then go back to that area and find the old monitors were back. I'd unload printers off the truck and then never see them installed. Clearly, it was my coworker and my boss, but sometimes I do wonder if it was bigger than that. Years ago, I was covering as both HR and LP manager for a district in a now defunct retail chain. The stores carried a variety of adult magazines, also now defunct. Overstock for these lucrative and quick-selling products were in a storeroom. There was a very small, for the time, camera in the room. One day, I was reviewing footage at a store and idly watching an assistant manager restock after closing. Then something odd happened. He was taking one copy of each adult magazine, opening it to a photo spread, laying it down on the floor. Soon, there were about 15 mags spread out. He left for a moment and then returned into the view of the camera completely undressed. Then he laid down on the magazines and started rolling around and, well, you can guess what he was doing. I met with him the next day and said, "I need to let you know that there's a camera in the magazine storage area." He stood up and said, "Okay then," and walked out of the store. I ended up putting him in our system as resigned and didn't dispute his unemployment claim when he filed. I went ahead and told the next person who took over the restocking job that a camera was there before he even touched a single magazine. Car dealership. Co-owner of the company had a used car lot he had registered under a friend's name. The big dealership would take in used cars, he'd pay a technician off the books to give it a bad inspection so the car would go to auction. He'd use the other company to purchase the cars for dirt cheap and sell the cars at a huge profit margin. Essentially got our KBB rep fired because she was evaluating trade-ins as being in good condition. But the inspections would all come back bad, so in the company's eyes, she was terrible at her job and paying people way too much for their trade-ins. They started to catch on when they realized close to 40% of all trade-ins were getting poor inspections. So they implemented a system where 2 technicians each did their own inspections. Suddenly, not so many cars were getting poor inspections. It all unraveled when they looked into it deeper and realized every single bad inspection came from one technician. In total, they estimated roughly $400,000 in profit had been stolen from the company over the past couple of years. It was pretty messy. A long time ago, I was an IT contractor working for a large company. There was probably about 20 of us on this one team that were all contracted by an IT staffing firm. It came to light that one of my colleagues had been previously fired as a high school teacher for a scam where he'd go to his student's place of employment, like Target, Best Buy, and steal a bunch of crap in exchange for not giving them good grades. When this happened, it was revealed that the IT consulting firm had not run a background check on any of us. The company we were working for called us into an office and said they needed to do background checks on all of us, and if there was anything to disclose, now was the time. No one said a word. In the next 2 weeks, one guy was let go because he had done time for mail fraud, another guy for attacking his ex, another guy for getting kicked out of the military for attacking a senior officer, and another guy who was a former cop who it turned out was under indictment for allegedly using his power to do some completely obscene acts. That was an interesting month. My God, you had the real-life equivalent of the rogues gallery working in your office. I have to wonder if the author here was the one non-dangerous ground-level employee there and realized that he was in massive danger. Also, if you're wondering how these people get hired, another person provides a great answer. You'd be surprised at how many companies' background checks process consists of either not actually doing it or completely ignoring the results. I've had an HR person dead serious claim their job was to make sure the background check was completed and that they didn't actually have to look at it or take any actions. Turns out 100% always get completed, but some get completed with major issues. But apparently that was all not HR's job. I had a story of a guy using an unmarked company car to run Uber Eats and DoorDash all day. He got away with it for a couple of years. He finally got caught because he was using his work phone for Uber and his data was astronomically higher than anyone else in the company. If he had just used his personal phone, he'd probably still be going. Apparently my predecessor did something similar. Working a construction and maintenance job where we were regularly just waiting for something to happen at one of the sites we were responsible for maintaining, and this guy just went out and did Uber Eats and DoorDash for most of his shift. That probably would have been fine if he'd had even a bit of sense about it and only done it when we were in our periods of fairly frequent downtime. But we worked in pairs and this guy apparently just showed up on time, always looking at his phone, and even when we had minor or major work to do, he'd just frickin' leave his partner and go do orders and come back like an hour or so later. We had a bunch of days where we'd finish as much as 6 hours early, and he could have absolutely made tons doing delivery and being on call, but nope. This guy was committed to just not doing almost any work for the job that, and this is what blows my mind, paid generally higher without any overhead costs so that he could continue with the door dashing simultaneously. Oh, I have two. This one guy kept watching adult material on his work computer, which was partially in view of other people. He was warned to never do it again. He was an excellent employee, but that's a fireable offense. He did it again. They mounted a camera right behind his desk and told him they were going to monitor him from now on. He did it again. They had no choice but to fire him. Another time, someone was looking for something in this new guy's desk drawer. He'd only been there a couple of months, and they found hundreds of little pieces of paper, each with an offense detailing when someone made him angry. Some of them made it clear the notes were instead of hurting people. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Previous HR manager was alright, smart, friendly with everyone, good people skills. He was even an adjunct professor during my last year in college, taught behavior modification and abnormal psychology. Then his wife divorced him for attacking her. He went off the proverbial cliff, started calling young, attractive girls from the lab into his office over the intercom, told them he was obsessed with them and offered them all the expense-paid trips to nearby music festivals, promised them free substances, whatever they wanted. They all turned him down. One girl received a decent settlement. He was immediately fired when they found out, of course. He spent the last few years trolling around our college town trying to bang anything that would give him the time of day. It's outwardly obvious he's on hard substances. Multiple stalking and direct attack charges, banned from 24 local businesses, absolutely unhireable anywhere serious ever again. My husband was the de facto IT person in his small company. The company had a nationwide sales force, and the salespeople would come into the office every couple of months for meetings, among other things. So when one of the Midwest sales guys, John, came in, he gave his computer to my husband and said, "Hey, it's been really sluggish. Can you take a look at it and see if something's wrong or if you can get it to run better?" And my husband said, "Sure, I'll take a look." Well, long story somewhat shorter, it was running slow because the memory was filled with adult images. So he reformatted the computer, which removed all of the offensive material, and it was working just fine. John came back in to get the computer, and my husband was like, "Hey, your computer was filled with a lot of non-work-related files and that's what was slowing it down. So I reformatted it and it's working great. I'd really suggest getting a personal computer for your personal files, as this is a work computer connected to our work network, and we strongly discourage personal files on any work-owned equipment. Laptops have really come down in price, and by the end of today I'll email you some links for some that are really good quality computers at reasonable prices, so you can have one for personal use." John just kind of brushed him off, gave a brisk thanks in passing, grabbed his computer, and left. My husband sent John the email with the links, and that was that. However, 3 months later, on a Friday, same situation. John comes in, computer isn't working, and it's filled with the exact same sort of stuff. So basically, my husband feels that John was given his chance and now the gloves are off. He goes to the company president, explains what was going on, and shows her a sampling of what was found on the laptop. John was fired that afternoon. I can't even wrap my head around that level of stupidity. He was given a get-out-of-jail-free card and basically just spit on it. You can't save people from themselves, I guess. And he probably had the nerve to think that this was literally anyone else's fault but his own. I won't begrudge anyone being into that kind of material as long as nobody's being exploited, but you've also kind of got to be discreet about that sort of thing, especially in a professional context. My wife's in HR. She recently had to handle the firing of an employee because a federal background check revealed he was some kind of local substance kingpin with an active court case. What's insane is that he was actually working this low-level service industry job. My friend worked IT support for a hospital. They have the ability to remote desktop into employees' laptops, even without authentication from the user, but this was only supposed to be done under special circumstances. I had an urgent ticket which required a remote login, but the doctor was completely unreachable, so he ended up just connecting to the laptop. Turns out the doctor was watching adult material at that very moment, and he immediately logged out, hoping nothing would come of it. Apparently the doctor reported the situation, landing them both in trouble. A guy got caught smoking green herb in the bathroom. He only got fired because he had it on the premises. If he'd said, "I'm taking a quick break," or had just disappeared to his car for 2 minutes, took a few hits and come back inside, he would have been fine. He'd been there for 20 years up to that point. It came to my attention after a few times that a woman would stay in a restroom stall and take all of the toilet paper off the rolls by just unraveling it. And she was seen putting what she had rolled up into her locker a few times. She claimed she was too poor for women's hygiene products, so she was told that they were provided and there was no need for her to use that much TP for that. Hoped that was the end of it, and then it started again, and she claimed this time it was for wounds and that she couldn't afford gauze and wound dressings. Okay, we just told her again that she could use what was in the first aid kits. Management really wanted to be gentle, so it starts up again and she confessed she just likes stealing things and this was easy. She was termed after that one. One of the salespeople had printed off their new offer of employment from a direct competitor on a company laptop, on a company printer, and then just forgot that the paper was there. She wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. All of her stuff got immediately locked, and she'd also tried to download the whole client database and sent it as an attachment from her work email to her private one. All this happened in one day. There was a guy interviewing for an engineering position at the company I worked for. Being from out of state, he flew in the night before. Around 2 a.m. the day of the interview, the HR manager's cell phone rings. It's the interviewee asking if she'd bail him out of jail. He'd been arrested for getting into a fistfight with a working girl in the bushes at some park. They had a dispute over payment due for the services given. He was fired before hired. Not HR, but my coworker went to work for a competitor and then never quit her job with us. She traveled for work and was able to work both jobs for months. Lasted until a customer mentioned he'd heard she'd left our company and asked who his account rep would be. When I worked for the federal government, one of our senior managers was dating 2 women that were his contractors. They lost the contract to a competitor. Not losing to want his harem, he demanded the company hire them. They said, no, and he cancelled their contract in retaliation. They sued and the truth came out. Our CIO demanded he quit. He said he was a disabled veteran and she couldn't fire him. He literally told her to go F herself. He ended up just getting moved. Not fired, not demoted, they just moved him out of IT. He still works at the company. This one guy was hiring working girls and dealing substances on his night shift. The guy admitted to everything. We found out because he had to give someone else his work phone, and a pimp kept leaving messages demanding money. You know, in my time, I've seen a lot of wild stuff, but people in HR were the wildest. Our HR generalist was pregnant. The father was one of the people on the production floor, but she didn't know which one. Fistfights broke out amongst all the potential fathers. HR VP was fired after a paid conference he attended was actually just a free vacation for him and his family. He didn't even go to the same city as the conference. HR director was having an affair with the IT director. Both of them were married. When they were confronted, they both denied it, so they were both fired. I saw them 7 years later on a plane coming back from Europe. Still together. I was the IT guy who involved HR. If you want to sell your homemade adult movies, at least use your personal email instead of your work email to do these dealings. Now, I have to say that in these later stories, there seem to be a lot of employees who just can't stop watching, or in this case, making, these films at work. Come on, people, this is like the one thing that you know you can't get away with, surely. My dad was working as HR in the construction industry. The story that stands out the most, they had a guy taking a crap in another fella's backpack. I worked at a recruiting agency, had a candidate with an interview lined up, big biker machinist, couldn't get a hold of him to set up. Finally, we got hold of his girlfriend. She had kicked him out. She informed us he got fired from his previous job because he threw his boss into a dumpster. Like WWF style. I was envious, but I still put him on the do not call list. Fired a guy for selling poor quality adult material DVDs. Long story short, someone brought one of the DVDs on eBay and was dissatisfied with the quality, so they called the number listed as the contact info for the seller. He called and demanded to speak to the president of the company. He was transferred to the president of the company and let the president know how upset he was about the quality of his movie. This was a manufacturing company. The guy had listed the company address and the main phone number as his seller contact info. I did some repair work in a food production company. One of the employees there told me a funny story about a guy that got fired. This guy would come in every day, clock in, do a bit of work, then disappear. It took a while for anyone to realize he wasn't working, as this is a big facility and no one could figure out where he was going. He wasn't leaving the building either. This was apparently a mystery for a while. Finally, it was discovered he'd somehow got his hands on a copy of the elevator service key, and he was running the elevator part way up, stopping it, opening the doors and climbing into the space below the elevator car. Elevators have a crawl space below them for maintenance. He apparently slept down there and then went out before the end of his shift, did a bit of work like nothing was wrong, and then went home. He didn't get fired, but in the days of MSN Messenger and Outlook pop-ups on Windows XP, a pop-up showed up as a co-op student was chatting to a friend on his work desktop, so the message was intended for a friend. What happened was that an email came in with a quick reply, which captured his message and sent it to the company. I'll summarize the email. The lunch lady is sick and won't be here today. And the co-op student's response, "Sorry, it slipped out, just like me out of your mom." He was petrified when he realized and went to his boss's office. They sent him home for the day and he sent an apology email the next day. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.